G'day, Matt Fradd here. Welcome to Pints with Aquinas. Today I am joined around the bar table, which is this, by my friend Cameron Bertuzzi of Capturing Christianity. You're really going to love today's show. Cameron is a Protestant apologist. We get into a lot of things. The best argument, I think, for Catholicism. We talk about the contingency argument. We talk about properly basic beliefs, Alvin Plantinga, Thomas Aquinas. We also talk about our experience of Dungeons and Dragons. Crickets, if you're into that. So that'll be really fun. So I hope you'll have a great time. And I want to ask you before we get into the show that you do one thing for me, maybe two. First is, please subscribe. It would really help the channel out. If you like what you're seeing, if you want to see more of it, click subscribe, then click that bell button right next to it. That way YouTube will be forced to let you know whenever we release a new show. Also, please feel free to share, leave a comment. That would be really helpful as well. That's all I got to say. Here's the show. Cameron Bertuzzi. How are you?
Good. How are you?
This is it.
Oh, great.
I'm doing really well. We should mention why we're drinking out of these coffee cups.
We should also make sure that we're drinking the proper way.
Yes.
Right?
Do it. It's lovely. Yes, this is espresso, and I didn't have any manly espresso or hipster espresso, which would be like just super minimalist. So I just had the floral stuff, and that's why we're doing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, the floral stuff is... Well, mine has... I guess there are some flowers on it.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
We all good, Neil? Everything's good? So it's so lovely to have you on the show. Thank you so much for flying in a couple of days earlier and hanging out with my family.
Yeah, it's been awesome.
This has been great, because if you had have just flown in last night, stayed at a hotel, and come here this morning, we still wouldn't really know each other.
Yeah, right.
But we played D&D together last night.
We did, yeah. It was a lot of fun.
You turned into a were-rat and attacked my best friend.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Yeah. I was a little skeptical. I'm also a big introvert, so going there and like hanging out with a bunch of people I don't know.
We should show people your cool your shirt there.
Oh.
We introverted but willing to discuss the Kalam Cosmological argument. It's awesome.
Yep, I actually got that inspired from...
Yeah, so I also have a shirt, introverted but willing to discuss. And I stole it from somewhere else, so it's just going around. It's good.
That's how creative work. That's how it works.
Yeah.
Creative stuff.
And then I'm introverted too. I get nervous if someone wants to take me somewhere, or if there's no way to get out. Mm-hmm. Like sometimes, like if I go somewhere.
Is it like more like social anxiety?
It might be, but maybe I don't think of it that way.
Mm-hmm.
I just think I don't feel comfortable here. I want to be doing my own thing.
Yeah.
So I remember.
Sounds like you're just introverted.
I remember being somewhere in British Columbia. I won't say exactly where in case people are watching and know it's them that I'm talking about. And I was driven to a party that was going on, right? And the guy dropped me off and had to go somewhere, and I was just stuck with these people I didn't know, and it was like 4 or 5 hours, and it wasn't fun, and it was terrifying. And the Uber didn't exist back then, so I couldn't just be like, I'm going to go.
Yeah. Well, no, it wasn't like that last night. It was, we got there and I sort of met everyone, and then we had a good time. As the game started to get rolling, it's not that difficult to sort of understand how it all works. Yeah. But it was fun. I had a really good time. Even Neil, the guy who's not on
who is a druid,
who also turned into a bear.
Yeah, and destroyed that werewolf
People could
thing.
Like jump on his back and ride him too.
I mean, have you, because you're an evangelical Protestant, for my listeners who may not be familiar with you, and you do fantastic work. Your channel is called Capturing Christianity. We'll have links below. But in your sphere, do you find kind of, by the way, what do you like, evangelical or Protestant? I don't want to call you what you don't call yourself.
I don't care.
Okay.
To be honest.
Should we just say evangelical? That feels nicer. I don't know.
I know that there people have like issues with that word.
Do they?
They equate evangelical with fundamentalist.
See, this is the problem, right?
Yeah. Just call me Cameron. No, I'm
my friend.
Yeah,
non-Catholic.
Friend.
I don't want to define you by what
Protestant.
you're not.
Protestant
is defining yourself by what you're not.
Protestant's fine. Well, sort of.
Protest. You're a Protestant.
Protestant.
Right.
Sure.
Against Rome. Okay, so my friend Cameron. So in your sphere, do you have people who would be would look at D&D like demonic or something?
Not in my sphere. Not the people that I hang out with. So, I actually posted about it last night on my private Facebook page, and a lot of people were happy about it, I guess.
Yeah,
there was
good.
Maybe there was maybe there was like a couple people that were, I don't know. I think they were just joking around, But I didn't get anyone that was like, oh, this is...
Yeah.
Not that I saw. I mean, maybe people, when they saw the post, they were like, oh my gosh.
Unsubscribe.
Yeah, exactly. Unfriend.
Well, while we were all there, we were sitting around a table smoking cigars. Well, I don't want to rat you out, but you were smoking a cigar and you look fantastic. While we were doing that, I thought to myself, this is a beautiful thing for this day and age where people are so connected to their screens all the time. It's a way to make friends sit around something and be engaged in something. And it's way more exciting than a text you may just got. So you just kind of put your phone to one side.
It was.
Which is
lovely. I was actually nervous. Like with it, and you may not have been able to tell that because my role, like the guy, the dungeon master is his name, right?
Yeah.
Or he's like in control of everything.
Yeah.
Which I was like, okay, so he's basically God of this universe, and he decides sort of what happens within the parameter. Yeah. There's a lot of like overlap.
It is the parameters of free will.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's like they have free will to do their little quest or whatever, but his
will is being accomplished through it all.
He's giving the situations to the people, and then they use their free will to. So it's almost like Molinism in a lot of ways. Anyways. I forgot where I was going with that.
Being able to sit around, you said you felt a bit anxious.
Yeah, I felt anxious because the role that I was given, I was actually supposed to, there was this vampire, okay? He's in control of everything. Evil demon. He's a vampire. And I had been seduced by, or slave, like I was his slave, okay? And so I had to basically try to get all of you guys killed, but y'all didn't know this. You thought I was a good guy. So that's what I was nervous about. I was like, how am I going to convince these guys? Or how's this character going to convince these guys?
And it's an awkward position. Like, hey,
first thing that you ever do,
outsider who doesn't know this friend group, you're going to be evil and try and kill all of them. Welcome.
Well, yeah, no, I was happy that's why, well, when I came in a few days earlier, I think the rapport that we built sort of helped make it a little bit more, put me at ease.
Absolutely, me too. We did a live stream on your channel.
On Saturday night. It was completely, well, we planned it like maybe 10 minutes before, but it was great. Yeah, we did it in the same room.
I think a lot of people were really happy to see an evangelical and a Catholic get along and like disagree without being disagreeable kind of thing, you know?
Yeah, I think we need more of that.
Absolutely.
My ministry is sort of geared toward that because there's enough of that. There's not enough of the kind of combativeness and, angry disagreement.
And combative is what sells. That's what gets the clicks too. And so how do you fight against that? Because you're trying to build up an apostolate or a ministry, whatever you call it, so you want to be able to appeal so that it's appealing so people consume it. But you also don't want to kind of just be controversial just for the clicks.
Yeah, well the way that I look at it is on YouTube, and the way that the algorithm works is that if you don't specify like who you're trying to target, then you're not going to end up reaching anybody. And so on my channel, I target the person who does care about being non-combative, being someone who's open to dialogue, very cordial. So the way that my show works is the people that see it, they love it. And when I get too combative, or if I post a video where I'm a little bit too snarky, they'll like tell me, they'll be like, hey, that's not why I watch your channel. I watch your channel because you just look at the issues. It's all about the analyzing stuff and philosophy. It's not about us versus them, tribalistic kind of warfare. So I think I've sort of carved out a space for people who appreciate that. And so, obviously I want way more people to be that way, and maybe later on down the road, it'll start to have a bigger impact. But right now I think that just doing it, there's enough people, there's a big enough target market for that right now.
Yeah, that's really great. And I've found too that as my modest YouTube following has grown, like in the beginning you post a video, you get all sorts of people, but eventually you're kind of like curating a particular audience, and you can learn to trust them after a while because they're coming to your show for a particular reason. Whereas in the beginning it's any random person who might have all sorts of,
Right, yeah. As you start to develop what you want on your channel, like you said, it's like those types of people will start to come and want to watch. So yeah.
Now, one of the things you do so well, of course, is theistic apologetics. I'd say that's probably the bulk of your show, right?
Yeah, we do have...
And Christian apologetics, resurrection stuff.
Yeah, so we do have some resurrection stuff, and I want to get into doing more of that. In fact, I just released a 3.5 hour, sort of what you do, a really, really long interview that I did with these two guys out of in Oxford.
It was 3.5 hours?
It was 3.5 hours of just awesome. Evidence for the resurrection.
See, I saw that on your channel, but I figured it was just a compilation of different talks on the... It's one interview.
It's one interview that we did. We filmed it. I split it into 5 parts on my podcast. And it had lived on my podcast for, I think, about maybe 6 months or so. And I decided, why don't I just post them all together in one long string on my YouTube channel? And so I did that, and actually it's sort of blown up. I think right now it's at 20,000 views, and it's already getting a bunch of responses from atheists because, we're talking about the evidence. Whereas if I had just left it on my podcast, it probably wouldn't have had this type of engagement or response, especially from the atheistic community.
That's what I found weird, because I started Pints with Aquinas as a podcast, and that was going solidly for 3 years until I started releasing things on YouTube. With a podcast, you don't have people reacting to it in real time.
Yeah, right.
Which is both positive and negative. I mean, you want to hear people's opinions, but I found that in the beginning I was a little more guarded on videos because people were just very critical, and you're like, man, I'm just trying to do my best. Whereas on a podcast, people either listen to it, or if they don't like it, they'll stop. But there's no way for them to go and tell you why you're a horrible person.
Yeah. Yeah, no, on YouTube, it is a lot. You got to be you're putting yourself out there.
Yeah.
And there are some Christian YouTubers who disable comments so they just don't have to deal with that.
Yeah.
And not to throw them under the bus or anything, but it's pretty well known. Reasonable Faith. They don't allow comments on their YouTube channel, any of their videos.
I wonder why.
Now, that is not to say, well, this is why. Because they have a forum on their website where they push people. They say, hey, if you want to engage these issues, then go sign up to become a member on our forums.
They're trying to drive you over there, yeah.
They're trying to drive you over there because that way it can be a little bit more moderated. You have a lot more, so I get that. But at the same time, if you really care about building a YouTube presence and your channel and views and everything, I think that you've got to leave that kind of stuff open. But on the topic of how do we respond or deal with these types of comments that we get from people that disagree with us, I think this is something that I talk about a lot, is that when we get upset when someone says something or criticizes us, and if we get upset at that, I think first of all, we shouldn't. If it's a good criticism, then we can grow from that, and that's great. If it's a bad criticism that doesn't apply to you, then it shouldn't bother you at all. But a lot of times we just get upset when someone criticizes us. Yeah. And that actually psychologists point this out too. It's criticism, if it's good criticism, you can grow. If it's bad criticism, you can ignore it. But I think that the reason why we respond the way that we do is because of sort of these deep rooted insecurities that we all have. And so when they touch on something that we're insecure about, we want to get, it's sort of a defense mechanism because we feel threatened. And so we want to get up and get back in their face.
And how have you dealt with that? Because this is a relatively new endeavor for you. How many years have you been doing this YouTube channel?
So the YouTube channel, I would say probably just a couple years. So,
not too long.
No, not
so.
How
have you grown in being able to take criticism, know when to block somebody, perhaps? Or
right. If I can tell that they're just a troll and they're just trying to sort of make waves and just, I don't know, just make fun of somebody, I'll just hide them from the channel. I don't really deal with
what happens when you hide someone from a channel? I actually don't know.
Yeah, no. When you hide someone from a channel, I think what happens is you just hide their comments.
So they think they're commenting, but no one's seeing them.
Right.
So you just mute them.
I think that might be how it is. Actually, I think other people can see that they were hidden, but they may not be able to see that they were hidden. And so basically all of their comments will just be there for them. They're the only people that can see it.
Yeah.
Basically.
I'm the same as you. If someone's trolling or being obnoxious or making fun of something and they're clearly not there that's when I'll hide them from the channel.
Yeah.
And part of the reason I want to do that is for what we just talked about. I want a particular audience to be with me along for the journey. And if there's someone just making fun of everybody, it's okay, this is not the spirit that I want the YouTube channel to grow in.
Right. But if it's a comment that's a good comment, substantive, and it's a good criticism of something that I said, I'll leave it there. Sometimes I'll respond to it if I have time to, but otherwise I appreciate those comments. And it took a while to get to that place where I could just accept that here's this criticism of something that at some point that I made in this video, and I can just let it sit on my YouTube channel and not let it bother me. And I think it goes back to that, what I had to sort of learn and go through was if it's bothering me, there's probably something deeper going on in me.
Yes.
And it's not on them, it's on me. And so that's something that I need to work through instead of putting the blame on them for them causing me to react this way. So if I see something and I'm that's a good point, there's a really good response to it, or maybe I just don't have time to respond to it, I'll just let it sit there and it doesn't bother me. But if it's a bad criticism or something that's unrelated or irrelevant, then I'm just like, well, people make comments like that all the time. That's basically 90% of YouTube, 99% of YouTube.
Sometimes I'll see like a comment that I think that's particularly crazy, and I'm happy that it's there, and I just let it go, and I let everybody respond to that person.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's one of the strategies, is to just let other people respond to the bad arguments.
If this was a debate, I would yield my time. Please keep talking.
Yeah, but if it's something that's completely disrespectful and they're just being obnoxious, then I'll just hide those people. But if they give a bad argument, I'm not necessarily going to hide them. I'll just let them, their bad argument just be there.
All right, I want to take a pause here and say thanks to our first sponsor, Hallow. This app is going to help you to pray, and it'll lead you in prayer. I have it on my phone. My wife has it on hers. You can listen to these beautiful meditations that are led. You can choose by a bloke or a woman, and you can have Gregorian chant playing in the background or synth music. It'll help you pray the rosary, meditate on scripture, do an examination of conscience at night. It's really fantastic. Hallow, Hallow. They offer a permanently free version of their app, right, which includes content that's updated every day. They also offer a paid subscription option with premium content. But by using the promo code Matt Fradd, one word, you can try out all of the sessions in the app for a full month. Check it out, totally for free, so you got nothing to lose. To take advantage of this special offer, go to hallow.app/MattFradd. That's hallow.app/MattFradd. We'll put a link below. You can click right through to that. Create your account online before downloading the app. It really is fantastic. All right, back to my conversation with Cameron. So why did you start capturing Christianity? Tell us about this journey.
Good question. So let's go back a ways. So back in, I think, 2012, my brother came out as an atheist to my family. And that really kind of took me by surprise, because I went through my own little period of doubt while I was in Bible school right after high school. And basically what I was doubting was Jesus' existence. I was like, well, how do we know that any of this stuff is real? How do we know the Bible is real? And what was interesting is I went through about a week of really serious doubts, and it was like really gripping me, a lot of anxiety and stuff. And then one of the teachers in my class, and this school is not really known for this type of thing, but one of the teachers mentioned that there was a guy named Josephus, who was a Roman Jewish historian living during the time of Jesus, around that time. And he wrote about Jesus. He wrote a lot of stuff about Jesus, and you can go and read his works. And so I was like, that's really cool if that's true. And so I checked into it, and it's a fact. Josephus was writing about Jesus and the crucifixion and stuff that happened to him and his people. And that was it. That was all that I needed in order to sort of get back in line and do my Christian thing. And so I didn't really think about those doubts or the evidential side of my belief up until the point that my brother came out as an atheist.
What was that like? Because do you come from a Christian family?
Yeah, our whole family's Christian. It was actually my brother-in-law who told me first, and he just called me up and he was like, "Hey, I have something serious to talk to you about." And he and I, like, we're big jokesters. Like we joke about everything. He's basically like my big brother. Okay. Like I've known him almost longer now than I haven't known him, because he was introduced to our family when I was really young. So he told me, he was like, "Hey, look, Trevor, something's going on with him, and we need to talk about it." So he told me, and right after that, I set up a meeting with my brother. I was like, "Hey, let's talk about this." And so we had a meeting, and it was awful. Well, when we first started, there was an elephant in the room, and neither of us wanted to talk about it.
It was just the two of you.
There was the two of us and his wife. She was there. I don't know if she was in the room or if she was in the other room, but she was in the house. So we got there, and I think we set a meeting out for like a week after I texted him or initially called him. And so during that time, I was like doing everything I could to try to like find something to defend what I already believed in Christianity. So I found William Lane Craig during that time, and I found On Guard, which is a book that he wrote, basically defending or giving sort of an introduction to apologetics. I watched some of his video clips, and so completely unprepared. I mean, I like literally just found out about him, watched like a couple of his YouTube videos, debates. And so I went into this discussion with him just prepared to just beat him over the head with this stuff I literally learned like 2 days ago. And so the discussion was very bad. It did not go well. And one of the things that I give a talk on this sort of subject, how to share your faith with skeptics. And this is one of the things that I talk about, is that if you go into a situation like this where you're underprepared and all you want to do is defend what you already believe instead of really searching for the truth, you're going to have a bad time. So that's something that I learned, and I've sort of thought about a lot more as the years have gone on. And I know that we may be getting off track here, but
no, this is great. This is exactly what I want to hear. This is so helpful to people because I've had those conversations as well.
Yeah, so it's got to be about truth. If it's not about truth, then you're just going to end up defending something that you grew up believing.
Right. And you're almost just sort of presuming what their response to your argument will be, and you're not even listening to the person.
You're not listening to them. You're not taking seriously what they're doing. And another thing is that when my brother was going through this period of doubt and that eventually led him to atheism, I didn't see any value in that. I didn't see any value in the courage that it takes, for example, to really question something that you've grown up believing. It takes a lot of courage.
Yeah.
And I think...
To make a decision that you know will be unpopular with your family and those you love.
Right, yeah.
It's a difficult thing to do.
So I didn't take any of that kind of stuff into account when we originally met. And it's really only something that I've recently started to reflect on a lot, is that like a lot of this stuff is not easy to do.
Yes.
Now, a lot of them as in atheists, a lot of them will have conversations with each other on how difficult it was at first.
Yeah. I mean, imagine what that would be like for you right now if you became an atheist.
It would be awful in a lot of ways.
You started questioning and at some point it just tips and you're like, I don't think I believe anymore. Which would be, I think we talked about this last night in the car, it's doubly difficult since you're beginning to sort of make somewhat of an income through doing this.
Right, yeah. So
laborer deserves his wages. It's a good thing that you're making money. I hope you'll make a lot more. But we have to be honest about the fact that like we're invested in this in a way that we're not just partial sort of observers. And
right. I think for me, because it was only a very recent transition. So I was doing this. I had no intention of doing this full time. Like I was a photographer. That was my profession. And so I was completely fine with just doing that basically the rest of my life. So I didn't, as I got into apologetics and to philosophy, that wasn't like one of my goals, was to be this apologist and do all of these things. Like that was not the goal. So the way that I went about the sort of methodology that I used in order to discover truth hasn't changed at all. So thinking more about the consequences, like you were saying, there is that fact of like, if I were to change my mind, that would have a big impact on the ministry and sort of other things and family and everything. But I guess what sort of grounds me is the fact that the methodology that I used is completely the same.
I like that, yeah.
So it's...
You mean when you engage people online and when you host those debates on your shows? And
yeah, I mean, again, it goes back to this search for truth. And I know a lot of people on both sides of this. If you're a Christian, you're like, oh yeah, he was just searching for truth. And if you're an atheist, you're probably thinking he wasn't really searching for the truth. But I think that's, as I look back,
we attribute poor motives to each other, don't we?
Yeah, we do.
Just like what you said, like with your brother, you attributed poor motives to him. You didn't take...
I couldn't see the positive.
Yeah, you didn't see the kind of virtue. I mean, obviously, we don't want anyone to be an atheist, and we pray that he would come back to the Lord, but that does take a certain amount of courage to stand up and choose to go against something.
Well, and also the Bible tells us to sort of test the spirits, right? And so we want to test whether or not our beliefs are true. We don't just want to believe everything.
Yeah.
So I think that there's virtue in doing that.
And one way I find is it makes it easier to be a little more kind of balanced in a debate is I sometimes like to ask myself the question, if someone's presenting an argument, okay, what's the most that proves? Right? So if they're taking aim at the contingency argument or the Kalam argument or something like that, I could go, okay, let's say they're right. What's the most this proves? Okay, the most this proves is this is a bad argument for God's existence. That's okay. Like that doesn't prove that God doesn't exist. So I should be able to talk about this and search for the truth with the other person.
Yeah, no, I like that. I think I've taken the same strategy.
Yeah.
So it's important to think about where the argument goes and what are the actual implications.
Yeah.
A lot of people will argue against something that happened in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
And really what that boils down to is an argument over inerrancy. It doesn't boil
argument
down
over
to
inerrancy or just the way it's being interpreted. Or
oh, yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
it doesn't even
options.
have to be that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because there's multiple ways to interpret a passage. And
so obviously your brother, Trevor, you said his name, he doesn't mind you speaking about him.
No. No, conversations that we've had, he's totally open to it.
Yeah. And so in that initial conversation, who was better? Who did that better, or were both of you just blowing up at each other?
It was kind of that, just blowing up at each other. And a lot of things that I did during that conversation that I've thought about a lot more now is another one of the things that I did instead of searching for truth is that I was shooting from the hip a lot. So he would raise some objection, just be like, oh yeah, well, let me just respond to that this way. And that's something that I hate to see in other people when they do it. But for some reason I wasn't thinking about it in this context of like
we just wing it. Sometimes I'll do that. I don't know what I'm talking about, and I'll just wing it and hope that it lands well.
Yeah, exactly.
It rarely does.
Yeah, just throw anything and hope it sticks.
Yeah.
And that's what I was doing. And I mean, I'm not saying that he was, perfectly giving all of these super logically deductive arguments and everything. It didn't happen that way at all on either side. But that from my point of view, I think as I look back, that's what I was doing.
Have you had conversations since?
Yeah,
where it's been a lot more productive?
Yeah, I think that we've had some productive conversations, but it's not something that sort of rules or all of our conversations.
Nice.
That was something I had to realize later on as well. Is that what my goal was after that conversation was to just every time I talk to him, got to talk to you about apologetics, got to talk to you about this new argument that I just learned for God's existence. And eventually I learned that that's not the right way to do this because you're not really caring about him. You're just
He's
trying
a problem to be fixed.
Or not even him. It wasn't about him at all. It was about trying to make myself look better, more reasonable, and to just sort of win.
I see.
And so it wasn't about him. It wasn't about loving him,
Yep.
really caring about what he's going through at that moment and everything. So
This is such a great point. Yep.
So I switched my focus from trying to win to just loving him. And that's what I focus on now is when we do have a conversation about it, we have it and it sort of happens organically, but that's not the focus of everything that I try to do with him all the time is to just try to like win this apologetic battle.
Yeah, I think this would be great advice to people listening because we all have people in our family who might believe things differently to us, either politically or religiously. I think it's important that we take a holistic interest in the person. I mean, we've all had people in our lives who we get the sense that we're doing something they disagree with, whether that be a Mormon missionary or a friend who thinks we shouldn't be engaging some sort of behavior. If all they did was talk to us about how we needed to change, we wouldn't want to be their friend. But if we believed that they loved us, and we got to talk to them about what show we're watching and what games we're into and what we're looking forward to about this coming summer, then you can have a conversation that I think will be a lot more helpful.
Yeah, I agree.
But I think it's important. This is hard to see in yourself. The point in taking a holistic interest in the person is not necessarily to make them convert. And that's what's hard. Because you're like, that's just another strategy. I'll pretend to be interested. It's like, no, just love the person. So when I came back from Rome, when I was 17 years old, came to Christ, my sister Emma, she wouldn't mind me saying this, was an atheist. She had read Dawkins and she was, I think, pro-choice and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, it was the same as you. Like every time we got into an argument, I would lay it down, And I think because I was older, perhaps, and maybe had read a little more, I was pretty good at like showing where she was wrong. Yeah. But she was wasn't willing to listen to it, and I'm not sure I blame her. And she's actually a Christian today, thank God. She's doing beautiful work in Brisbane, Queensland,
That's
Australia.
Awesome.
Yeah. But I think to myself, okay, so why, if let's say I'm right in thinking I had good arguments and they were overwhelming her bad arguments, and yet she wasn't, changing her mind, darn it. Why is it that we do that, do you think?
What do you mean?
We sometimes tend to treat people like computers. You put in the right syllogism, click enter, and they should just change their mind.
So you're asking why don't people just respond to logic and reason and arguments?
I guess that's what I'm asking. Because let me put myself in the hot seat. If an atheist were here and he were debating me and I had nothing to say to him and he gave me a great argument, I wouldn't convert. I wouldn't be like, oh, you're right. I would speak to everybody I know smarter than me. I would do a lot of research. Like these are things that we didn't have access to in the early 90s. When people, you were just in your little town and there's the village atheist or the village Christian, they came at you with an argument, it made sense to you. Unless you were going to go to the library and look up what they said and what people have said about that, you were pretty happy to be like, okay, maybe you were happy. It may have taken some time, but then you eventually converted. And then you weren't encountering objections.
Yeah, right.
Whereas today, no matter what view you take, be it Christianity or Judaism or Islam or atheism, there's someone on the internet smarter than you that can probably, right, that can respond to one of your objections in a way that you're not sure how to answer. I think that's true for 99% of us.
Yeah.
How do we deal with that? How do we live in that climate?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on this. And I'm trying to organize them in my mind.
Yeah,
to
it's a long show, so it's okay if they're not good guys.
All right. So one of the thoughts that I have is if we're worried about like this person who might exist that's smarter, that could give all of these arguments against us. We could do the same thing on the other side. There could be some smarter person than that person who is on my side who could then respond to them. And so we're not actually going to get to like a skeptical conclusion with that thinking, in my view, because we can always imagine some smarter person. I mean, God ultimately would be the smartest person who could just demolish this atheist arguments. And so if we're just going to go to like these different levels of these imaginary people who are going to be responding to our arguments, I think we're going to run into like a sort of self-defeat problem.
Yeah, like an agnosticism, really.
Not even that. Like it wouldn't give you any reason to be skeptical at all, because the argument would be self-defeating. Like your reason for thinking that that's a reason for skepticism, there could be someone smarter who could come along and say, "Oh well, no, that's not a good reason for skepticism."
But the infinite regress of opponents would cause you just to stand still.
That's one part of it, but the other part of it is that the argument itself would have to lead to a skeptical conclusion. So that's one part of it, is to build this like infinite chain of people who are constantly responding back and forth. That's one part of it. But the other part would be that chain. The argument would be, this chain therefore gives you reason to be skeptical. That would be an additional side argument. And so what I'm saying is that of that side argument, you could have people on both sides. And so basically that's going to sort of cancel out. Okay. Because the argument is...
But what does that look like? What's the result if in this imagined experiment it cancels out? Doesn't that lead to sort of like, well, I just can't know?
No. This is difficult to put into words. I'm doing this all on the top of my head here. And I'm trying to figure out if I should start using some terminology. I don't want to. But if we're thinking about... So you have an objection. An atheist is giving you all of these objections to your Christian belief. Okay, and this is an imaginary person. You're saying this. We can imagine this person, and
it may not be imaginary. It may be someone
that you know of.
And you're like, I wouldn't know how to respond to that. Right. I hope somebody does. And so then you find somebody who does, and you think, yeah, but he would probably respond some way, to that, and.
Right, and I think that you could do that indefinitely.
You can, yeah.
You could do that indefinitely. So that might be reason enough to be sort of skeptical that this is doing anything, that this imaginary situation is really should lead to some skeptical conclusion about your own beliefs. I think the fact that you can go back and forth is enough. But there's another side of this, which is to say that even when we think about this, infinite chain of going back and forth with these two different people. There's a separate argument where that says that infinite chain is a reason to doubt your beliefs, because these people couldn't go back and forth and defend and argue and go back and forth.
Yeah.
So the argument would be, if there's people who can rationally disagree with what you have to say, then you should be skeptical that you have the truth, basically, would be that argument. But there's people that disagree about that argument. And so it would run into like a sort of self-defeat type of worry.
That's very interesting.
So that's one worry with that type of argument. Another worry with that type of argument is that usually in the literature of disagreement, epistemic disagreement about how we come to know things, there's something that's called an epistemic peer. So in order for this sort of situation to work, they've either got to be an epistemic superior, they've got to be more knowledgeable, more intelligent than you, or they've at least got to be on your level of rationality. If they're dumber than you, that's not going to be a reason to be skeptical. We don't typically think. But I think all of this, what I'm talking about right now, like building out these sort of assumptions that are going into this argument, we don't really think about this. It all just sort of happens naturally.
Yeah.
We think, if someone can respond to us, then someone that disagrees with us, that's automatically a reason to doubt my beliefs. So what I'm doing is I'm drawing out some of the assumptions that are going on with this. And so back to the point of epistemic peers, you have someone who is equally as intelligent, equally as knowledgeable as you, and they have access to the same exact evidence, and they come to a different conclusion or a different belief. What should we do with that situation? And so some people will say, and these are equal weight theorists. I can't avoid using this terminology.
Yeah, it's good. It's
These
helpful.
are equal weight theorists who say that there's equal weight on both sides. And so basically with this situation, you've got to be skeptical, because this person is your peer. They know as much as you. They're just as intelligent, and they're coming to a different conclusion. And so basically both of you ought to become agnostics. You got to be an agnostic now. And so one of the things I pointed out earlier is that people disagree about this theory, about saying, well, we've got to be agnostic because we have this stalemate. So some people will say, well, at that level, this argument, there's people that disagree on both sides.
And who appears.
And so there's a kind of self-defeat type of worry there.
Oh, that's very interesting.
Another thing that you could do, and I'm just taking all of this time to explain this.
Yeah, this is great. Feel free.
Next step of the argument is you could deny that this other person is your epistemic peer, who you're actually disagreeing with. And so that's one thing that you'd have to figure out is, well, how intelligent is this person? How do I know that they, weren't biased in the way that they came to their beliefs?
Right, because someone could be equally as intelligent and biased in a way that would lead them to draw a different conclusion with the same evidence.
And so you would just be skeptical that this person is your peer that you're disagreeing with. And how do you really prove that? Like what type of evidence would you be able to give somebody to prove to them?
I don't know if you could.
Yeah, you're on a par with this person. And so that's another worry with this type of thinking. Is that we'd have to really question, like, who are our peers, who are our superiors, and is there really nothing biased that's happening in the situation?
Right.
There's a lot of moving parts.
Good. Well, this gets back to the point, like, we're not computers. We're not mere intellects who aren't influenced by other things. Yeah, this is really fascinating. Thanks for spelling that out, because I didn't quite get it when you first explained it, but now I see what you mean with that kind of self-refuting. Not because you were doing a poor job, but because I'm your intellectual inferior.
No, I wasn't. To be honest, I haven't really. I have an article on this on my website. I think it's called Equal Weight Theory. So if people want to learn more about it, I'm really glad that I remembered that I did this.
Yeah.
So you can go out and check it on my website, capturingchristianity.com. Search for Equal Weight Theory, and you can get some more info about it.
But it is a very interesting phenomenon, just the fact that we have the world of information at our fingertips in a way that we didn't when I was a teenager. So like I'm 36, and I lived in Australia, so the internet really wasn't a thing until about 1999 or 2000. So in my high school, if someone disagreed with me, I would either have a comeback, which may not have been good, but maybe it would have convinced them and nobody else could come back at me in my high school. So I went, cool, done. That's the truth. There was nothing really else maybe I wasn't intellectually curious enough to go read books like I should have been. But yeah, there was just maybe people felt a sort of stability, whether they should or shouldn't have, that they may not feel now, because there's always somebody out there who disagrees with you. Yeah,
so I think the right course of action is to ignore those types of concerns and just to continue looking at the evidence and trying to judge the best that you can. Yeah, because we all deal with bias, and we're all trying to fight against bias. And so I think that's all that you've got to do, and all you really can do is just continue to fight against your own bias and look at the evidence as honestly as you can.
And if one were to keep God up on the chalkboard, so to speak, until one feels that they had, examined and exhausted the evidences for and against, they haven't actually made a decision, right? They're not living like a Christian. Like maybe they're living like a Christian externally, like they'll still go to church, but they doubt, but in their heart, they're not praying, they're not obeying Christ. They're just as willing to kind of get rid of it than to not. This is itself a decision. Like if you don't choose theism or atheism, you're going to start living like a mishmash of the two, or like one or the other. So to not choose is a choice, I guess is what I'm saying. Like if I have a choice between marrying my wife and marrying some other woman, and I just can't decide, and I'm endlessly weighing the pros and cons, I'll get nothing in the end. I won't get either of them.
Yeah, it's equal to...
We have to make a choice.
Yeah, it's
We're
equal
forced
to making
It's almost
a choice.
like it's not an option for us not to make a choice.
Yeah.
We're going to, practically speaking, make a choice one way or the other, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. And if you're 50-50 on whether or not God exists or Christianity is true, you don't have to force yourself to believe that God exists. You can still, like you said, commit to a Christian way of living. So you do still have a decision. You have a decision whether to not do anything at all. It doesn't matter what your belief state or your mental states are. That doesn't matter in terms of making a decision either way. So if you're completely agnostic, if you're a perfect agnostic, which I don't think there's actually anybody who's like that. No one is perfectly reasonable and agnostic when it comes to God's existence.
Interesting.
But that's irrelevant, because you still are going to make a decision either way. You can make a decision to just live the same way that you've been living, as a secular life, not really paying any attention to God or Christianity or any other religion. And so you basically are making a choice by not doing anything. You're choosing to live a secular life.
Okay, I want to take a pause and say thank you to our second and final sponsor, Covenant Eyes. Covenant Eyes is the best filtering and accountability software on the web. If you're tired of being exposed to pornographic things, if you have children, you know that they are going to be exposed to pornographic things, do the responsible thing and get Covenant Eyes. Put it on all of your devices. We here at the Fradd household, we have it on everything. Phones, laptops, desktops. We don't let our kids play at friends' houses who do not have this. It's really important that you get it. Best filtering app out there. Also has accountability. What that means is you, as the parent, let's say, will get a report of your children's online activity. If they go to any websites that they shouldn't, you'll be right there to see that, and that way you can come in and love on them and teach them how to use the internet appropriately. Maybe you're a single guy and girl and you're struggling with pornography. Find an accountability partner, and that way the notifications will go to them, and you'll find it's a lot easier to beat temptation when you know someone's going to get your reports. CovenantEyes.com, CovenantEyes.com. And here's what's great. For my listeners only, if you go to CovenantEyes.com and sign up and use the promo code Matt Fradd, that's my name, one word, Matt Fradd, you can try the entire app for a full month for free. So you've got absolutely nothing to lose. And at the end of the month, you decide you don't want it, just delete it. You don't get charged a cent. I don't think that's going to happen, though. I think you're going to install it and think this is the best thing you've done. So CovenantEyes.com, use the promo code Matt Fradd at checkout to get a month for free. Sometimes I'll hear atheists say, well, if God existed, there would be a sort of consensus on this issue, but there's not. But of course, we disagree about all sorts of things, like whether we have a soul or what free will is and whether we have it, whether it's this is all just an illusion that we live in and so on. But that doesn't mean we can't have a rational belief about the external world or my free will or things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that there's a really easy explanation to explain disagreement, and it's just that we're humans.
Yeah.
And so then the question would be, would it be more likely for God to create this type of person or a different type of person that would be less susceptible to bias or whatever?
Huh.
So that's probably, I think, where the argument would go.
There was a time in my life where I'm ashamed to say that I hoped atheism was true. I mentioned this to you in passing last night.
That seems so crazy to me.
Yeah, it is crazy. And it's because I had a perverted view of God the Father.
Mm-hmm.
And I had been listening to so many debates and so many talks by atheists, and I was reading them and just what they would say about, the reality of God. And I was just like, oh my gosh, it wasn't a conscious thing. I wasn't saying, oh my goodness, God is like that. It was just this sort of doubt that crept into the goodness of the Father. That's what it was like. It's kind of like if you knew your father existed, but you started to hear lies about him and then began to believe those lies, you might rather him be dead than in your house. It was kind of like that.
Or you hoped for that. Yeah, you hoped that he would just sort of go away.
Yeah.
Because you heard really bad stuff about him.
Yeah, so really, my solution was I had good people in my life. I got to read good spiritual books and obviously the scriptures teach me about the goodness of the Father, his tenderness towards us and things like this, and it really helped. Yeah, man. So when it comes to sort of, you said you read On Guard, which is an excellent book, I think. Was any of these arguments, did that help solidify your faith in God? Because it doesn't sound like you ever really had a crisis when it came to belief in God. You said it was regarding the historicity of Christ, maybe, but
it was the historicity of Christianity. Was there any really good historical basis for Christianity? That was just a period of doubt that I went through. But I have experienced doubts along the way. Like there was a time when I didn't really think that any of the arguments for God were any good, and I eventually got over that. And I think that was driven ultimately by emotional factors. And it was driven by this very irrational belief that if you can find a possible way out of an argument, then therefore you've got, or the argument isn't good, or you shouldn't believe it, and I think that's a lot of times what happens is we think, oh, well, I don't have to believe that Christianity is true, or I don't have to believe that this is a good argument because there's this possible way out. Maybe the universe is eternal, for the Kalam cosmological argument. And that's enough for some people to really get them to really doubt that an argument goes through. But from like a rational standpoint, possibility is not the same thing as probability. Just because you have a possible way out doesn't mean that it's probable that the universe didn't exist. And so you've still sort of got to follow the evidence and decide what's most probable, not what's just possible. So I have gone through periods of doubt myself. And They don't last very long.
Since
Through this journey, they don't last very long. And I try to do my best to analyze like what from the rational point of view, like what is it that I'm really doubting?
Yes.
And what are all these connections that I'm making? Another thing that I've noticed about my own psychology is that I put a lot of emphasis on authorities figures. It's like this person I judge as really smart, really knowledgeable. And so if they have a good objection to my belief, I just sort of find myself putting a lot of weight on that. But that's not necessarily like a real good, solid argument that Christianity is false or that God doesn't exist. It's really just sort of an emotional thing that I'm leaning to just because I find them to be a reasonable person.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of missing steps between this person is like really reasonable and that could even be, we could be skeptical about that because people can appear reasonable, but can be driven by all sorts of emotion and bias and everything. But what I try to do is I try to analyze like, why am I actually doubting? Like what is going on?
Mm-hmm.
And so when I start to actually look at the reasons why, they usually are just not very good.
I agree. I do the same thing. When I experience doubt, it's more like a sea of feelings that make me feel a certain way. And that feeling is towards doubt and skepticism. And I'll stop and I almost like shake myself out. I'm like, okay, what is the argument?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
What's the thing that I've heard recently, I've encountered? And I'll kind of think it out loud. I'm like, that's terrible. That's a terrible reason.
Yeah, or I'll just start to like doubt one premise of one argument. And the doubt is not based on any reasonable anything. It's just like, oh, well, now I'm starting to experience doubt about this. I'm like, okay, why? What reason led to that? And it's usually from when I've tried to do an analysis on it, it's usually it's not based on anything but like a feeling.
C.S. Lewis in the Screw Tape Letters says, one way to tempt this Christian who's at church is to keep everything sort of vague. This vague sense that the people around me should be in togas and sandals, but never to have it be explicit that he thinks that, because then he would recognize it as ridiculous, but just this vague sense that things are a bit ridiculous. And it's sort of like that.
Yeah, I think so.
I think, too, we very often don't take into account the fact that if Christianity is true, we live in a world at war, and that the demons exist and Satan exists and wants our damnation. And so...
Well, I mean, that's another great C.S. Lewis quote. Is that one of the things... I think it's in the Screw Tape Letters. It's like one of the things... Well, I don't have the quote.
Oh, sure.
Off the top of my head. But it's basically one of the things that Satan was so brilliant about was convincing everyone that he didn't exist.
So that's my point. As we assess these things, if we've got Christianity and atheism, well, if Christianity is true, then there is a whole kind of invisible demonic realm that doesn't want us to come to belief in Christianity. And it's something we've got to wrestle with. It's not just like a neutral weighing of the premises. But then, of course, if you're an atheist, you say, well, that's just ridiculous. This is just kind of fear tactics to make you side with there. Yeah.
Well, I think what you're pointing out is that there's these sorts of leaps in reasoning that happens. We start to have these feelings of doubt, and then we leap to a conclusion that doesn't follow at all, and we need to be aware of that, and we need to sort of put an end to it. But on the flip side, to be charitable, I think that on the Christian side of things, when we're trying to build arguments for our own faith or whatever, I think sometimes we can just have a feeling that this is a good argument instead of having a real good solid reason for thinking that it goes through and that it's, it leads to God's existence and everything else. So I think that it happens on both sides. It's not just on the skeptical side of things. I think that sometimes, and again, I noticed this in my own initial walk, or if you want to call it a walk, into apologetics.
Journey,
my initial journey into apologetics is I found myself really wanting to believe these certain arguments. Like the Kalam cosmological argument was one of the arguments that I was just like, yeah, this is a really great argument. And then after a while, I was like, you know what? After I started to look in some of the objections and everything, I was like, you know what? I'm not super convinced. But as I look back on to the initial part, it was just this desire to really think that there's an argument to make myself appear more reasonable. And so I think that, again, it can happen on both sides. Now, to sort of preface that, or make a disclaimer on the Kalam, I'm now completely convinced that the Kalam is a good argument. So, and I like to think that that's because of arguments and evidence and reason and stuff, but obviously I acknowledge that there could be other things going on. I would like to
hear two atheists talk about their belief system in the way we're talking about ours. I don't see a lot of that. I'm not saying there aren't humble atheists. atheists who recognize...
Are you saying that we're just like the most humble
I think
people?
we've been pretty humble. Yeah, I think we're being very transparent about our doubts and the fact that belief is difficult. Now,
well, psychology is, you can't get away from it.
Yeah.
You can't get away from it.
An easy objection right now to throw out on YouTube is, the reason you're finding it easy to doubt is what you believe is crap. That's why.
Yeah.
That's clearly not it, though. I mean, there are brilliant people who believe these things. I would just like to see some atheists who wrestle with the kind of psychological aspect behind their own... I know they wouldn't call it a belief, they'd call it a lack of belief, but I think it looks pretty close to a belief.
Well, this is something related and interesting. Is that's one of the atheist tactics, is to point out, well, hey, look, the Christian just believes for this psychological reason. They want to believe in an afterlife, and so therefore that's why they're really trying so hard to be a Christian or to be an atheist. And when enough people tell you something, you might start to become open to it and start to really entertain it. And so I did that. I was really entertaining the thought, maybe it's not all about reason and evidence and arguments. And so I started to really question that aspect of my psychology. And it actually took talking with my friends about it for them to point out, no, it does actually seem like you're looking for the truth here. And it took someone else to look at it from the outside to convince me that no, what these people are saying is not true. And so that's something that I had to eventually come to. But it's interesting how the psychology of it all works. And so, and I think that's one of the reasons why atheists are some atheists, not all atheists are like this, but a lot of them will just speculate forever about why theists believe what they believe. They ignore their own psychology in the process and their own psychological reasons. And
project or...
unless if you're not human, if you're the one robot who doesn't have psychological factors that plays a significant role in why you believe what you believe. Maybe you, Mr. Atheist, you're the person who doesn't have to deal with bias. But if you are a human, there's going to be some explanation, some very good scientific, psychological explanation for why you believe what you believe. And so it's not, I guess... I'm kind of rambling at this point. But
I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, no, but this is something that I think about a lot.
Yeah. Yep. And then you asked me a great question last night in the car. Do you mind if I bring it up?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it was very kind of you. You said, do you mind if I psychoanalyze you for a second? Is that okay? I know that's kind of weird and I don't mean to be a jerk or whatever. I'm like, yeah, it's fine. And you said...
I've been debating this for a couple nights. I was like, do I even want to talk to him about this?
Why don't you bring it up so you can state it the way you wanted to rather than me?
Okay, so because we disagree, you're Catholic, I'm Protestant. We talked about that at the beginning. What label do I need? Anyways, so I got the impression, be it reasonable, be it unreasonable, be it, because I'm a jerk or whatever, I got the impression that you are a Catholic because you sort of fell into Catholicism. And that's sort of just where you've been since that point. And that's what you've defended. And that's why you believe what you believe, because you just happened to fall into Catholicism.
And my answer is, that's partly true.
Yeah, that's
partly true.
That really surprised me that you were just so willing to admit that.
But I think that's how most of us come to our beliefs.
Right.
My answer to you is, if I was converted at a Baptist Bible camp, then I would probably adopt the interpretation of those around me. And then I would say, hey, I'm encountering this Catholic who's challenging my belief in sola scriptura or something. And they would give me answers and I would respond to them. And who knows? Now, I think Catholicism is true. I do think that. I'm not just saying, well, I fell into it and therefore I don't have to be critical of my beliefs. And basically the arguments are the same, but I'm just going to stick over here because it's easier. I do actually think Catholicism is true. But I think this is just a reality we have to face. We are all kind of biased, and all of us are, and so we obviously have to see if our biases line up with the truth. But
yeah, and we have.
But what made you think that? Because I thought it was really you asked it in such a gentle way, and I thought it was cool that you did it. But was there something that I did that you were like, oh, that's not cool? Why is he acting like that? Or?
No, I think what sort of spawned it was when I was hearing you tell your journey, because you started out as an atheist. And then
agnostic. I was never an atheist. Yep.
Okay, so you fell into Catholicism. You said you had some experience.
Yeah.
And so it just seemed to be like that. That's what just happened.
Yeah.
Is that you went to this meeting where there was 3 million people, 2.5 million people.
2.5 million people in Rome.
And you became a Catholic on the spot.
Yeah. And I was baptized, right, as a Catholic, and so it was the easiest thing to be brought into.
Right. But and another thing we talked about was if I had been in that situation, that would have been true of me.
Right. So
Like, it's not something that's just...
So here's the difficult question. How do I know I'm right? How do you know you're right? You know, like that's a difficult question that
Well, to me, it's not that difficult. It's just...
maybe it's not
arguments.
difficult to assess the arguments and decide which is superior, but it's a difficult emotional choice to see your own bias, if that's even possible, and then to really
to try to work against it. Yeah.
Because I was saying to you earlier, and I chatted with Trent Horn about this, you know, atheists will say, well, you just have this preconceived belief, and then you become an apologist for what you already believed.
Right.
But we do that about so many things. When I was a child, believed the external world was real. When I was about 16, I started to doubt it, and I had never heard of the word solipsism. And then I started to find reasons to believe what I had believed in the beginning. Or someone might write a dissertation on why a certain action is intrinsically evil. And they may have always believed that, but now they have evidence for it.
Right.
And you wouldn't say, well, therefore they're wrong because they were just trying to justify something they held previously.
Right. Right. So ultimately, it is just going to come down to the arguments and to the evidence. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that's sort of what I was getting at before, is that it's ultimately just going to come down to that. So we can talk about bias and try to prevent that as much as we can, prevent us from being swayed by all of the things that make us want to believe what we want to believe. In order to combat it, we just try our best to look at the arguments and the evidence.
Has Catholicism ever been a live option for you?
I would say right now it's a live option.
Yeah.
To just be completely transparent. I think right now it's a live option because I haven't done the study yet that I would like to before I get into it.
And so right now you've probably got friends on both sides, right? Like friends who think Catholicism is an absolute perversion of the gospel, and other friends who are like, this guy's also really intelligent.
So it depends on what you mean by perversion. I think that I have friends who would say that the Catholicism does not teach what the sort of biblical gospel
I guess that's what
message.
I mean by perversion. I understand that almost all evangelicals would agree that Catholics believe good things.
Yeah.
But then they would also say Catholicism teaches things that are...
They sort of add unnecessary stuff.
Add unnecessary things or just believe erroneous things about God and salvation.
Yeah.
So then what do you do with that? Like... honest question, like what would happen if you go home from Pints with Aquinas and you're like, I think he's right, I'm going to be a Catholic, and suppose you were now, I tell you get a big following, wouldn't he follow us? No, you'd pick up some followers, but you would lose a lot. Same thing with me. You and I have a chat and I'm like, you know what, this whole papacy thing is bunk. I don't know what to do. I got to become Orthodox, or like that's a terrifying thing.
To me, I guess it's not that terrifying, because again, I guess this goes back to the fact that I really do care about truth. I really care about it. And so if Catholicism is true, I want to know that. I'd like the consequences.
It's really neat, man.
The consequences, that's good. That's important.
Yeah.
But ultimately, like, I prefer, I'm more interested in that.
Man, that's beautiful. Because I think 2 years ago, I would have said that, but I'm not sure I would have meant it. Because it's easy, right? Atheist, Christian, we all say, all I want's the truth. And you engage with enough people who say that, and you're like, no, you really don't. And so that's maybe why I'm a little reluctant to say that.
Say what?
I would hope that I could say what you just said, and do say what you said, right? Yeah, like ultimately, if this isn't true and I can know something that is true, I want that, regardless of the consequences. I do think that intellectually. But because I encounter people who seem so biased and are totally unaware of their own bias, it makes me question my own bias and whether I'm capable of just deluding myself, I guess.
Yeah.
What is the number one obstacle to Catholicism for you? Like, what's something you're like, okay, this is the thing that I can't yet take it seriously because of this, this, and this? And we don't have to debate it or anything unless you want to chat about it.
Yeah, let's not debate it because, again, I haven't done like a study on it or anything. But initially, one of the things that's on the top of my list is the papacy and how all of that works. And I know that a lot of my Catholic friends are sort of upset, and there's just a lot of like gray area and like, how do we really navigate this? And the scandals don't really bother me that much because it's just these group of, it bothers me in the sense of like, it's a terrible evil and this is really bad and no one should have to endure this and no one should have to go through this. But from a logical standpoint, from the truth of whether or not this is true, that it's completely unrelated to me. So I guess one of the things that sort of sticks out of my mind, and I see Catholics among themselves talk about a lot, is how, Pope Francis, he does some really weird stuff. And just in the history of the papacy, there's just a lot of weird stuff going on.
Yeah.
And so that seems to me to be something that I would have to really work out and understand.
Yeah, that'd be the biggest thing.
It'd be one of the bigger things, yeah. Like I talked with a Catholic friend of mine about the Eucharist, and he basically convinced me that it's not that big of a problem, really. I'm thinking that, it still might taste like wine, it might still taste like bread, but that's a completely different thing than what it could be.
I think the infighting within the Catholic Church is a big deterrent to people considering, honestly. Because I wouldn't call Pope Francis a good pope. I wouldn't say he's a good pope. I don't think I'd say he's a bad pope.
See, when he first came into office,
Sure.
what is it? What do you call it?
When he assumed the papal throne.
The throne. I don't know, when he became infallible. When I first saw him
become pope,
become Darth Vader.
Yep.
The Sith Lord. I actually thought that this guy's cool.
Yeah.
Right, because he didn't wear all that like extra jewelry.
Regalia,
yeah.
So he was on the poor.
He was the people's pope.
Yeah.
And so I was really drawn into him because of that. But now, like some of the stuff that he's saying is like really
confusing.
It's really confusing.
That's why I wouldn't say Pope Francis is a good pope, because he's incredibly confusing in a day and age where we'd like some clarity and some guidance, and we're not really seeing it.
So what initially I think people were excited about, now it's starting to...
Well, he could do both, right? I mean, you could be concerned about the poor, live simply, and teach clear doctrine.
Yeah.
And not completely... yeah. And I also think like there was a day and age, and for the majority of church history, we didn't live with Twitter and news feeds. And so the Pope could be like having mistresses or charging off into battle. All of these things have happened. Stealing the papal cutlery. Like all crazy crap has happened, right? There was one Pope who denied our Lord 3 times. Peter. So like this has all gone on, but you weren't necessarily seeing it constantly.
Yeah.
So I can see how that would be a deterrent. And I know like even... Like sometimes my response to Catholics though is I'm like, okay, but what are you going to do? Because if you were looking at the Jews in the Old Testament and your litmus test for true religion is morally perfect or almost morally perfect religion, you would have missed the true religion. When you see what King David sleeping with Bathsheba, killing her husband, like you see some of the shenanigans that are going on amongst the Jewish hierarchy, you'd be like, okay, this is not God's people.
That's not one of the things that bothers me.
That's cool
about Catholicism.
And you know what? I wonder.
It's true of Christianity.
Exactly.
More broadly.
Because you hear atheists who say, well, why are there so many hypocritical Christians? And you recognize something can be true and people can still be sucky.
Yeah, right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, they would just not be living up to the standards that the Bible sort of sets out.
Right. How do you deal with the variation within Protestantism? I know it feels like all the old labels are sort of fading away now, and people are just sort of wanting to refer to themselves as evangelical, or they'll say, I'm more this or I'm more that. How do you navigate that? Does that make sense?
Well, what do you mean by navigate? What's
like, how do you choose? Like, am I going to be more of a Calvinist, or am I going to think this way about free will? And what am I going to think about what baptism does? Can I lose my salvation? Does hell exist? Like, I feel like as a Catholic, what's great is I'd say like the basic answer to the papacy is just like, we think that Christ established a church, and that church can help us know what God has revealed. God has revealed himself, and we can know what that revelation is. So I don't need to wander around Christian blog sites deciding who has the best argument for, hell or not hell, or this or not this. That God wants me to know and accept the truth, and I don't have to be terribly worried about it. And whereas I think if I were... Now, we have our own stuff as well. Like, there would be like fractions amidst smaller things, like different liturgies, and people put different emphases on different prayers and things like that. But I think if I were a Protestant, I'd be like, okay, now I've got to figure out like what I believe. Because there's a lot that Protestants believe, right? There's Protestantism isn't a thing. It's Protestantisms. I mean, do you find that like a freeing sort of thing, that there's this freedom, you might be able to accept hell as a Protestant, maybe you don't have to, that kind of... Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I mean, it doesn't bother me that there's a bunch of different views that you could take as a Bible-believing Christian. So ultimately, I think it's really just about what the Bible teaches. And that can be difficult, but it doesn't really strike me as like a real serious problem. So,
but isn't it weird that you've got all these Christians who say they go by the Bible alone and they come up with contradictory views on many, many things?
It depends on what kind of problem you mean. Like what would be the problem?
How do you become a Christian? How do you be saved? Can you lose your salvation? These sorts of things. That would bother me.
Okay. Yeah, what I would go back to, and maybe this is going to fit more in line with Catholicism, is the sort of bedrock of Christian belief, in my opinion, is to look at the early church creeds, like the Apostolic Creed or the Nicene Creed, and start there. And so I would sort of start there.
And if something contradicts that.
And if something contradicts that, then there'd have to be some kind of split or something. But these are questions where we're like kind of on the periphery of my...
Yeah, totally. And we won't keep going down there. I want to ask you, what is your favorite argument for God's existence right now? If Neil is an atheist and I've secretly hired him so that you can proselytize him, but you can pretend you're talking to me. He's not really an atheist. But what would you say? What's a good argument?
The contingency argument.
Okay, and this is Aquinas' third way. Of course, you might be referring to something slightly different.
Yeah, it's going to be similar.
But since it's Pints with Aquinas, I feel like we should at least mention him. Tell us what...
There's going to be a lot of overlap for sure.
Yeah, what does contingency mean, and what is the contingency argument?
So I have a version of the argument that I like the best, and this is the argument, one version of the argument that kind of pulled me out of one of my sort of dark periods of doubt. I don't know why I even use that language right now, but I went through a period of doubt. And this is the argument that pulled me out of it. One of the arguments. And it was because, again, what I was focusing on was, there's this possible way out of this argument, so therefore I should be skeptical. And so what I found with this argument is that there's really not a way out of it. There's not. And so even God like worked with my irrational doubts and brought me sort of back into the fold, almost, so to speak. I wouldn't consider myself a non-Christian or agnostic or anything. It was just a short period of doubt, and this is what pulled me out of it. This argument in particular. And there's a couple different versions of the argument. The one that is really easy to understand, and again shows that it's impossible to get out of, is you paint this paradox or these two different options between dependent things and independent things. And I'll use some examples. So contingency, let's start there actually with that word real quick, and then because there's two different senses in the way that word is used in these discussions. The argument from contingency, there's two different usages. So one use would be this cup is contingent because it can go out of existence. It doesn't always have to exist. It's contingent.
So would another word for contingent be dependent? Are you using those words?
That's the second usage.
Okay.
So the first usage is it can fail to exist.
Okay.
So it exists if we want to use some philosophical language, it can exist in some possible worlds, and it doesn't exist in other possible worlds. Or it just doesn't have to exist the whole time in a possible world. So this cup hasn't always been here. There was a time when it wasn't arranged in this shape. Even if you don't think that like macro objects exist, the arrangement of it itself didn't exist. So this cup is a contingent thing. I could smash it and it would go out of existence. So something that is non-contingent or necessary just has to exist all the time everywhere. And so that's what a contingent thing is something that can fail to exist in some sense. So a dependent thing is something that depends on another thing for its existence.
Right now or in the past?
Right. I guess either way. And that's actually a good distinction because I think you're talking about the causal series, the different types of causal series.
I didn't mean to get into that. Sorry.
No worries. It doesn't necessarily have to do with time.
Okay.
So we could take more of like a hierarchical, like a split moment of time and talk about dependency that way. But I think it works on either way that we look at it. I hope we're not going too quickly.
No, if my face looks bad, it's just that's how my face looks.
No, well, I'm
following.
No, I feel like you're good at following, but with the audience
good.
and everything.
They'll love it. Yep.
Okay, cool. Sorry, I just
this is what they came for.
Okay, good. All right, so we're talking about these two different kinds of contingency. And so dependence, and we talked about this a little bit earlier. Well, maybe I don't want to go into that.
Yeah, because I mean,
let me just give the
one
distinction.
would be helpful. It's just contingent or dependent.
Yeah, well, okay, so I am dependent on my parents. If my parents hadn't existed, then I wouldn't exist. So that's one way they look at it.
Good.
Is if something else didn't exist, then this thing wouldn't exist. Okay. Right. So like the moon, if something else, if this asteroid hadn't crashed into the Earth, then the moon wouldn't exist. So the moon is dependent on an asteroid or whatever it was that happened with the moon. That's what dependence sort of means.
Gotcha.
And I think that's actually like what people think about when they hear contingency.
Yeah,
you think about that type of contingency, dependence.
Yeah.
But contingent in the philosophical literature, at least in the contemporary scene, is more thinking about the first kind, that something can fail to exist. And so, but the argument that I'm about to give is on the second time, the second type, the more down to earth usage of the word. And so I'll just use the word, the language of dependence. So this cup, going back to an example, this is a dependent thing, and it depends on something else for its existence. And everything that we experience in our everyday lives is a dependent thing. Your car out there, the blinds, this table, the microphone, everything that we interact with on a daily basis is a dependent thing.
I think most people would agree, okay, man-made things are dependent. Got it. But it's probably a little more difficult, the atheist might say, if you start talking about natural things.
So you mean like an animal or a rock or something?
Sure.
So a rock would still be dependent. A rock would be that formulation of a rock. Even if you don't think that rocks exist, you would still think that arrangement is dependent on something else. Like maybe there was these tectonic plates that hit in the core of the earth, and that's what created these mountains, and these rocks fell down off of the mountains. And so it would be dependent on something else for its existence. These rocks would still be dependent in some sense. There's something that it depends on. If that mountain didn't exist, then this rock wouldn't exist. So it would be dependent in that sense. So what I'm doing now is I'm building this first initial plank of the argument that everything that we experience is a dependent thing, depends on something else for its existence. You could also say something like a rock depends on the earth for its existence, if we want to go more broad.
I don't want to cut you off because I know but I also would love to be able to interject throughout. So I don't want to, step too far ahead and you're like, I was about to explain that.
No worries.
But I think very often, I suppose if I were an atheist, I would say there is just so much we do not know about reality, and the more we understand about it, the weirder it looks. And so, we can look at things like plants and dogs and rocks and cups and realize that they're dependent, but you don't necessarily interact with reality as reality. You're not necessarily in touch with reality. You're in touch with what you perceive, like space and stars. But to just flat out say everything we interact with is contingent feels like a step too far, because you don't know what's at the heart or the bedrock of reality.
That's helpful. Let me make a clarification. So I'm not saying that everything is dependent. I'm saying that everything that I've interacted with,
fair enough,
you and me interact with on a daily basis is dependent.
Yep.
And so here's maybe an example to see how we could sort of generalize from a principle like this. So take gravity. So in our experience, gravity works uniformly everywhere that we go, right? And so what scientists do is they can make what's called an inductive generalization. So based on your experience, your inductive experience of the world, you can use that and sort of generalize to the universe as a whole, or just something outside of your immediate awareness. So with gravity, there's very little reason, for example, to think that gravity doesn't work the same on the Andromeda galaxy as it does in the Milky Way galaxy. And part of the reason why we think that is because based on our own experience of the world and what we interact with, it's very uniform. Yeah. Gravity works the same everywhere. And so the simplest explanation of why gravity works in our area of the universe, our little pocket of the universe, is that it just works like that everywhere in the universe. So we could use a kind of inductive generalization when it comes to dependence. So most of everything that we experience is dependent. But here's the interesting thing about this argument is actually I'm going to get to the conclusion that not everything is dependent, that there is something that is independent. And so even if you raise that objection or that skeptical worry, you'd actually be pointing in the direction where I want to go. Yeah.
Okay, but there's a problem with induction, right? In that it's not certain. I mean,
right.
I mean, we thought if you lived in Europe that all swans were white, and then we visited Australia and realized some swans were black. So that just shows that induction is fallible. Right. So we can be wrong. This isn't a proof of anything. It's something that is just, but it is true. Based on our evidence, this is the best thing. Just on a basic level, like if I encountered something that was necessary, that would freak me out. And I think that goes to your point. Like everything we interact with on a daily basis is contingent, is dependent. Yeah. If we found something, bumped into something, or encountered something in some way that we realized wasn't, we would freak out. Right. So that just goes to your point that you're right. Everything we encounter is dependent. Okay. Right. And so what we go from the second step of the argument is to think about all of reality.
let's suppose that, and for the audience, let's suppose that we could put all of reality. I'm getting away a little bit too away from the mic here. Suppose that we could fit all reality into this cell phone. Mm-hmm. You trying to look for something?
I was trying to think, like maybe a cup and this. Look at this. What is this?
How about this one?
Okay, sure.
What is this?
That's a
St.
missile.
Joseph Catholic Manual.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Well, anyways, so let's suppose that this book is all of reality.
Okay.
Okay.
Everything that exists.
Everything that exists.
Or everything
if
that's
gods
contingent.
exist, everything.
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 Right.
All of reality. If gods exist, they're included in this. This is all of reality. Now, there can't be, and this is impossible. This is one of the reasons why I don't see an option out of this argument. There's nothing that can exist outside of everything.
Right.
It's impossible.
Right.
So all of reality has to exist independently. The totality.
Everything has to live independently. Right, because it's everything.
The totality of reality has to exist independently.
Right, that makes sense. Yeah.
So here's the problem.
Because if there was something outside of it, it wouldn't be independent, and yeah.
Yep, it'd have to be in there. If something can explain all of reality, it'd have to be in the group, but then we're not talking about something that's outside of the group of everything that exists.
Okay.
So there can't be an outside explanation of everything that exists. That is literally impossible. It's impossible. Okay. But the puzzle, here's the problem.
I want you to interject, so be thinking.
Here's the problem. Well, you can't get out of it.
I'm not pointing at the camera, I'm pointing at Neil, everybody.
You can't get out of it, so keep that in mind. It's impossible to object to this.
Wow. I love how on one level you come across and are super humble, and then you're like, this is impossible. If you think this is wrong, you're wrong. Go.
No, I mean, I am kind of joking when I say that.
Okay.
So if you have a good objection, then maybe, right. I would love to entertain it. So the puzzle is this. We've already looked at everything in our experience is dependent. Okay, so we have this dependent reality that's sort of built, and that's what we're most familiar with. But as we look at reality in total, it exists independently. The problem, you can't build an independent reality out of purely dependent things.
Right.
So, if I'm a photographer, or at least I was a photographer. I'm a full-time. I'm in full-time ministry at the moment, but I know a lot about cameras. I know a lot about photography, and I still am a photographer. Anyways, so one camera is dependent.
Yeah.
Okay, it's dependent on something else for its existence. And just imagine in your mind a camera. But let's now think of a group of 10 cameras. Okay, so just adding on more dependent things, we don't suddenly have an independent group. So you can't build, you got to have the right building blocks, basically. So what Josh Rasmussen he calls this a construction problem. So in order to build the right kind of structure, you've got to have the right building materials. And so to get an independent reality, you can't only use dependent stuff. It'd be like trying to build a fire out of water. You've got to have the right building materials.
At least one of those things has to be independent.
And so the theory, we're still just on the side of the puzzle. Like we're just trying to understand that there's a puzzle here. So how do we have an
Say it one more time, because I'm struggling because it's early, and then people must be struggling too. So let's just do that again.
Okay. Yep. So everything in our experience is dependent.
Yep.
And you can't build, and I guess this is another step that we can add to it. You can't build an independent reality out of purely dependent things. That's impossible because of this type of construction problem. And you can generalize, you can just by the light of reason, you can see this very clearly. If I take one camera and I just add on more stuff to it, a whole bag, I don't suddenly have an independent existing thing just because I'm adding on more
Dependent
stuff.
things, yeah, sure.
Yeah, so size is irrelevant.
That makes sense.
Number of atoms is irrelevant to the distinction between something that is dependent and independent.
All right.
But, and this is because it's like, again, this argument, you can't get out of it. You can't get out of it. When we're thinking about, this is a necessary truth. All of reality, think about this book again, all of reality, everything that exists, everything. There can't be an outside explanation of all of reality. And so all of reality has to exist independently. But how is that possible?
So I love it helps, right, to have something visual when you're not as brilliant as some people. So for me, I'm like, right, okay. This is all of reality. All of reality exists, you want to say, independently.
There can't be an outside explanation of all reality. Yeah. So
how do you explain all of reality?
How do you explain the independence that we see in the combination of everything that exists?
All right.
And so we're still just at the level of the puzzle.
Okay.
How do we get there? What's the explanation?
Yeah.
How do we square this? And so what Josh does in his work is he gives a proposal. And the proposal is that we just sort of posit a necessary foundation. The foundation of reality that has its nature. It just has existence. It's independent as part of its nature. It's foundational. Okay, sort of just like a house has a foundation. All of reality has a foundation that everything else, all the dependent things are built on.
There is an explanation outside of which there is no other. It's bedrock.
Exactly. And at this point, like I mentioned, the atheist does not have to jump off at this point. The atheist can accept.
And you should point out that some very intelligent atheists are willing to bite the bullet.
Like Graham Oppie. Yeah, Graham Oppie's been on my show and he's had a discussion with Josh, and they agreed with this stage of the argument. They agreed that there's got to be some foundational layer of reality, of the universe.
That's necessary.
That's necessary, that has to exist, that has its nature, its existence independently, doesn't rely on anything else. But what atheists will say, like Graham Oppie, is just, well, this is, it's the universe, or it's what he calls simples. It's not God. The necessary foundation is not God. And that would take us into a discussion.
Or would he say there's no good reason to think that it's God? Or would he say that the necessary foundation is fundamentally at odds with what theists mean by God?
I don't know that he would say it's at odds.
Okay, so he would just say there's no good reason to think that, whatever that is.
I think he'd just say it hasn't, there hasn't been good reason proposed to get to that level.
Wow.
But so, in more of my discussions with Josh, I'm now convinced that I don't know if I would say that it's impossible, but I think there's really good reasons on this side of the argument. So on stage one, I think everybody has to accept that. Any rational person has to accept it. But on the stage two, when we're arguing about the divine features of this being...
so what is that thing? Yeah.
Yeah, what's the nature of this thing? I think that there's a little bit more gray area on that side. And that maybe I won't be convinced of that. Maybe I'll be convinced just as strongly of the second part of that as I am the first part.
Excellent. But so when you say you can't get out of this, you're not necessarily saying this absolutely in your mind proves the existence of God.
Right.
You're saying you're convinced that there is something necessary.
Right.
And that we have good... And then that leads... At least I would think stronger support for theism than not.
Well, I mean, there are some arguments that, and I'm still working through them myself, that the foundation of reality has to be God, basically. There are deductive arguments that say you can't. You've got to posit a divine being in order to sort of explain why there's a foundation at all.
Why do you have to do that?
So that would take us into stage two.
Okay.
Do you want to go ahead and do that? Or do you want to get any more clarity on the first part?
No, that makes a lot of sense to me. And I think a lot of people are willing to accept that there has to be something necessary that underlies all unnecessary things. There has to be an explanation outside of which there is no other explanation. That just is the bedrock of explaining or explanation. There's something necessary upon which contingent things are able to exist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so one of the things...
At this point, the atheist gets really nervous because he sees where you're going. He's like, oh my gosh.
You're going to theism.
You're going to tell me this necessary thing cares about my sex life, and I'm really not into that,
Yeah.
And it's difficult when you argue with people, right? Because that's the thing. Like, they're jumping ahead, and you're like, no, just wait. Because at this point, you say, maybe theism isn't true, but there's a necessary being.
Yeah, right.
And even if you get to theism, you still haven't shown Christianity's true, so everyone can just relax.
Yeah. And I think going back to talk a little more about psychology, when people feel threatened, they're going to immediately shut down. And so it's important to really feel out how the conversation is going when you're talking with someone about this. And that's why I like to give caveats like, this is just stage one. We're not getting all the way to God's existence right now. I think you have to accept stage one, but this doesn't mean you have to be a theist at this point. So I give caveats like that because I realize that people automatically will put up
That's
barriers.
what I was doing the other day to you. Remember?
Yeah.
I'm like, you can say Mary's the mother of God and not believe all the other stuff we believe. Like, that would be okay. At least bite that much off, yeah.
Yeah. So I like to make those types of caveats. I think it's important to do that. So the stage one of the argument is, if you can really get that and understand it, I think that it's very difficult to get out of, because initially I think what people want to do is just say, well, there can just be dependent things all the way down. Like, everything can depend on something else, just all the way down. But what's so fascinating about it is when you think about totality, the totality of reality, imagine the book again, that's impossible. You can't have an outside explanation
There's not
of
turtles
all of reality.
beneath this.
Right, exactly.
Right. Turtles all the way down would still exist in that.
Exactly.
And it can't be all the way down, yeah.
Exactly. So that's not an option. Like, it's not an option at all. And so, but that creates the puzzle. How do we have this independent reality when everything in our experience is dependent? And so ultimately we have to posit a sort of something necessary at the foundation that's sort of holding all the dependent things up, or is the ground of it all. And then the second stage of the argument is to really look into that foundation and ask questions like, what is the nature of this thing? What can it do? What are its properties? Is it just the universe? Is it God? Does it have knowledge? Does it have any value? And once we start to ask those types of questions, we can start to probe deeper and start to really pull out some really interesting things that come out of this. So in my research into this argument, there's really two broad strategies in building like a stage 2 case for the contingency argument from a necessary thing to God's existence. And actually in literature, this is called the gap problem. Like atheist philosophers have noted, you've got a gap here. Even if I accept that there's a necessary thing, there's a big gap between that and God's existence. And this is called the gap problem. Alexander Proust in his work, he calls it the same thing. It's a well-known problem. Even the Kalam cosmological argument has this gap problem, where we're going from a beginning of the universe or a cause of the universe to God. That's a big gap, big leap. So it's important that we recognize that is like, yeah, that is. That we've got to do some extra stuff in order to get there. So there's two broad categories of argument that close the gap. One of them is to just put this argument aside for a second and let's look at some additional evidence, some additional arguments. Let's look at something like the fine-tuning of the universe for life. Are you familiar with that argument?
Yep.
So the fine-tuning argument, we could look at that a little bit, and if
so you're saying you need to bring in other arguments to get to God to close the gap. The contingency argument alone won't do it.
I'm not saying you need to.
Okay.
I'm saying this is one broad strategy.
Gotcha. One of the two.
So one strategy is to look at more arguments, look at more evidence, and even Josh Rasmussen does this. There's no reason not to do this. It's just one strategy. So, and I think ultimately you'd have to do that if you're looking at what does all of the evidence that we have suggest about reality? Does God exist? Does God not exist? We don't just want to look at one thing. We want to look at all of the evidence. We want to also include evidence like that points the other way, that might point against God's existence. We want to look at all of it, not just the part that we think confirms our own belief. But the point is that we want to look at everything eventually. So this is not some like trick or some, it also doesn't mean that the argument isn't good. It's just one of the strategies, and I think we have to do it ultimately anyways. So we can look at additional evidence, different arguments, and get to a divine being that way. I think that's totally plausible. We could do that. I think the fine-tuning argument is a great argument. That's one strategy. The next strategy is to just look at the foundation itself and just say, well, what are the properties? What are give me some arguments for thinking that the foundation of reality has to be a person or has to be a perfect being or God. And so we can do that now if you want. We can
go for it.
Look at the second stage.
Yep.
All right. So with this part of the argument, stage 2, where we're looking at the foundation, analyzing it, I want to do this a little bit differently than what I normally do. So I want to think through with you. Let's analyze it together. What could the foundation be like? Okay. Well, let's ask actually another question. What can be a distinguishing factor between something that is dependent and something that is independent? What would be a good demarcation between the two?
It doesn't have parts. There's no change. It cannot change, presumably. If something changes, it's dependent on something else, possibly. Or if it has parts, it has to subsist in a whole, which would be a type of cause.
That's interesting. Is that more on Aquinas?
Well, I guess it's just me trying to think it through.
Oh, okay.
What would you say?
All right. So one second. Water.
Yeah.
So... And this is something I'm still thinking through, and I'm analyzing myself. That's kind of what I want to do it with you here. One of the things that Josh points out in his book, he wrote a book recently called "How Reason Can Lead to God," and he lays out this whole argument and does a couple of the same moves that I'm making here, and getting you to think about stage 1 and stage 2 and analyzing the foundation. And what he points out is that when it comes to dependent things, think about like a mountain range. Say that this mountain range has 3 peaks, okay? What he says is the reason why something is dependent is, at least in part, because there's some kind of limit that it has. So a mountain range, say a mountain range with 3 peaks, has a limit of 3. And that limit is what needs an explanation of why it's dependent on something else for those 3 things that are features of that thing. So limits is what he's saying. Limits are the thing that basically demarcate between something that is dependent and independent. So something that is unlimited can be independent, whereas something that is limited in some way is dependent on something else to explain those limits. So here, give another example. So my phone is a dependent thing. We've already established that, but it also has certain limits. My phone is only a certain size. It can only do so much. It can only hold so much information. It's limited in certain ways. And it's those limits that really cry out for an explanation. And so the basic argument is that when it comes to this foundation theory, there's got to be some necessary independent foundation. There can't be an outside explanation of this foundation. Right? We've already talked about it. All of reality, there can't be an outside explanation. So there can't be an outside explanation of the foundation. Imagine, suppose that my phone is the foundation. There can't be an outside explanation of this that we've already hit.
That's bedrock.
Yeah, that's bedrock. So there can't be an outside explanation of it. But if the foundation, suppose it did have limits, suppose it was limited in how much it can know, or there was limits in how much power it has. Suppose it has the power to create 20 universes, for example. That's a limit that is a feature of dependent things. And that would need an explanation. But we can't have an explanation of the foundation. And so basically it's impossible. This is another one of those impossibility arguments where it's almost impossible to get out of.
Are you familiar with Aquinas' distinction between essence and existence?
I've heard of it.
Because it sounds like you're getting very close to this, right? You and I are something. We also have something, existence. Unicorns have neither essence nor existence. Tyrannosaurus Rex has neither, but did once have existence. And it has an essence. I beg your pardon. Unicorns do have essence, but don't have existence, right? They're a thing that we can think about. It has an essence, but not existence. And so whenever we define something, it comes from the word like definite, right? We're limited by what we are. We don't share in all of existence. We are something. And so when Aquinas says that God's essence is existence, he's saying something that sounds like you're getting to. When you say he's not limited to an essence. He is existence, and is undivided. You can't in any way divide him. Are you open to that kind of way of thinking?
I guess I'd have to get a whole lot more clarity.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if I'm the guy to help you with that. I'm just spitballing.
Maybe I'll just read some Aquinas.
Yeah, but it's interesting to me that it sounds like it's going in that direction, which is awesome.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure that there's overlap. And there's ways that these arguments can sort of work together. So it doesn't necessarily have to conflict. You can still be a proponent of the 5 ways, a proponent of this argument.
Totally.
They don't have to necessarily conflict with each other. But what we're thinking about, and I want the audience to really think about this too, what is the best theory of the foundation of reality? So some people will say, well, hey, it's just the universe. It's some part of the universe is the foundation. That's what a lot of atheists will want to say. And what we run into when we start to really, okay, so it's one thing to say, oh, well, it's just part of the universe. That's what it is. That's one thing. But now actually do the hard work of explaining what you mean by that. Okay. What can it do? What are its properties? And when you start to do that, what you're going to run into inevitably, unless you want to call this thing God, inevitably you're going to start to put on what Rasmussen calls arbitrary limits in what it can do and its power. Again, suppose it can only create 10 to the 500 universes, or it can only create, 20 universes. That's a limit in what it can do. And
that's interesting. I need to hear more from Josh about why a limit is a sign of dependence.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a difficult thing for me to grasp right now.
Okay. I think he would say that it's a feature of every dependent thing is that it has some kind of limit in it. And so this is a way of helping us see the difference between a dependent and an independent thing. Was that everything that we know of in a dependent thing has some kind of limit in its size, its geometry, its shape. And so, and to add to that, any limit is going to need some explanation of why it has that limit. Why does it have that shape? Why does this mirror over here only have 4 corners? Mm-hmm. It's a rectangular mirror. Why does it have that shape? Why doesn't it have some other shape? And it's dependent.
And presumably, Josh and you don't want to say that this thing's, of course, physical. So you're not going to be talking about shape or size, because that wouldn't apply to this thing, presumably.
To this thing,
yeah,
right? Yeah. So what you would do,
because that itself would be a limit.
That would be a limit. Yeah, number of vertices,
mm-hmm.
the shape of it. Yeah, how many points it has. So like a triangle has three corners, and so that would be a kind of limit and would need an explanation. And I mean, it's really interesting to think about. This is why I'm saying, like, I want the listeners to really think about this. If you're an atheist, if you're a theist, if you think that this isn't a good argument, feel free to jump off. But don't just reject it just because, you don't like it. Really think about it. Think about what is the best account of the foundation of reality. And if you're a naturalist, it seems from my point of view that you are going to have to build in certain arbitrary limits.
What do you say?
But then it looks like a dependent thing, like it needs some outside explanation, but it can't have an outside explanation because it's the foundation of all reality. And so you're going to run into this contradiction if you start to limit what this thing knows or what it can do. And so ultimately, I think we do sort of have to just go back to the classical conception of God. Unlimited in value, unlimited in power, unlimited in knowledge, unlimited in goodness. And we're going to run into like the divine conception of God. Another thing to tag onto this is that an arbitrary cutoff or a limit is going to needlessly add to the thing's complexity. So when you add in this idea that, the foundational theory of everything can only create 20 universes, that's making the theory more complex.
Yeah, because you ask why.
You're stipulating something that it can do. It requires more concepts in essence. So what Josh does is he builds a theory that is the simplest theory that you can even imagine. It says this is the simplest theory. It explains everything. It doesn't run into this problem where dependent things, part of the reason why we know they're dependent things is because they have these limits. This theory avoids all of these problems. And the theory is just that the foundation is perfect. And it avoids everything. And it's the simplest because you don't have any arbitrary cutoffs in value or in power or in knowledge. It's perfect. It has unlimited of all of these things.
Yeah.
It'd be like, going back to a scientific example, it would be more complex to say, gravity works everywhere in the universe, but in the Andromeda galaxy. Like, that's a needlessly complex hypothesis. Yeah. Why would you do that? You would just say, gravity works everywhere. That's simpler. It's easier to understand. The concept is gravity works everywhere. There's not some random cutoff in where gravity works. But I want the audience to really think about this. It's not just me giving this argument. I want them to think about it for themselves.
So here's a question. Someone will say, okay, well, if this thing is unlimited, it would have the power to be you, presumably, too?
I wouldn't say that that's a power.
To be you?
To be someone else. It also depends on what you mean.
Because some people will say that this sounds like it's getting dangerously close to pantheism, right? That there's this thing that runs throughout all of existence that may very well be existence, that is sustaining everything, and that maybe this is just a good argument for pantheism, that there is this necessary being which
is the universe. Do you mean?
Yeah, maybe.
What do you
maybe
mean?
That is what I mean. That it's the universe is God. Sorry.
Okay, so that's where terminology can sometimes be unhelpful, because you can call it natural, you can call it supernatural, you can call this thing the universe if you want to. You can call it a perfect being, whatever you want to call it. I think we're still going to run into these issues.
Right.
So you're still going to run into the fact that we need an independent foundation of all reality. That was stage one. And then you're going to run into the fact of, if you start to give this thing limits in what it can do, what it can know, these are going to be arbitrary, first of all. They seem to require some deeper explanation, but there can't be a deeper explanation. So you're going to run into these issues no matter what you want to call it. Or So that I guess that's ultimately where it's going to come back to.
Okay.
Whatever you want to call this thing.
Well, that's an interesting way. I mean, if that works, and I look forward to getting this book. It sounds amazing.
Yeah, and even Josh says that, like, some people will say, a supernatural thing is over and above, it's unnecessary, it's needlessly complex. And so what he says is, let's just call it natural.
Yeah.
Let's just call God a natural thing.
Yeah.
And it's really just about terminology. It's like we're talking about the same thing. You want to call it, supernatural or natural, or you can call it whatever you want, but we're still ultimately going to have to talk about the same thing.
Because supernatural for many is a pejorative term anyway.
Yeah.
And so you don't even need to bring that back.
I hate that distinction. I think it's so unhelpful. Basically what people do is they take things that we no longer believe and call those supernatural. So it is pejorative. It's like purely pejorative.
Interesting. But no,
we don't believe in ghosts and fairies, and so those are supernatural, and so we don't believe in those. And so what you're doing is you're doing the same thing.
With God, yeah. But I want to read this book because, as you say, that could be a way to close the gap. I just need to read it a bit more about why limits point to something being contingent.
Yeah, it is very abstract.
And don't try to. If your goal is to try and convince me of it now, it'll be a very long episode where I'm like, but don't do it.
No,
because I think you've done a good job explaining it.
Okay.
I just need to think about it more. I need time alone to think about that.
Yeah. So here's another thing that we could do at this point. So I talked earlier about a construction problem where you can't get an independent reality out of purely dependent things because you don't have the right building blocks. In the same way, you can't build a fire out of water. Okay. And what he argues is that there are certain features of reality, like consciousness, where you can't do the same. You basically run into a construction error. And so what he wants to do is build consciousness into the foundation of reality. So you can basically do the same kind of strategy. See that, actually you can't get a conscious being out of purely non-conscious materials just because we know that's a construction error. It'd be like trying to build a fire out of water. You don't have the right building blocks. Suppose that you were looking around here and the dust in the air had took the same shape as all of your neurons that were firing in your brain. Like that, the dust wouldn't suddenly become conscious because you even if you have the right shape or the right structure, you don't have the right building blocks. You need something that is sort of already conscious. And so he takes those types of arguments and introduces them in the book.
That's really good. The other thing I like about this argument is that it avoids a lot of the sort of Aristotelian jargon that Aquinas uses. So that's one, and I'm not saying that's a detriment to Aquinas' arguments, except that when you're trying to present them to a modern person, you have to explain accidents and substance and essence and all that. And it also doesn't have the stigma that the Kalam argument has. When people are like, I've already heard it's ridiculous, it's been refuted 1,000 times. You're like, well, has it? But okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, and just for the audience's sake, we are just barely scratching the surface.
Fantastic.
Of this argument.
So tell us more about this Josh bloke. What's his name? Once you say it,
Josh Rasmussen.
I'm never going to forget it again. It's locked in the vault. Rasmussen.
Really?
Josh Rasmussen.
I didn't know your brain worked like that.
I don't know if it does either. We'll see in 5 minutes. You can ask me again. But no, I mean, I keep saying Josh Ratty Metacha, Josh Rasmussen. Cool. That's awesome.
Musen. You already forgot it.
Don't you say it? Rasmussen.
Yeah, you said Rasmussen.
Did I? Gosh.
You did.
So my brain does not work like that, evidently. I am not perfect in knowledge or memory.
You have limits.
I have limits. I must be dependent.
You are dependent.
That's cool. So, because in my interview with Dr. William Lane Craig, he mentioned him, didn't he?
He did.
Were you surprised that he did that?
No, I wasn't surprised.
Is Josh aware of that? That's very flattering.
He is. He's aware of it, but he also has met Craig a bunch. And this is an interesting story from Josh, is that the first time that he met Dr. Craig, I think he may have been an agnostic or a deist at the time.
Josh?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, he was agnostic for a while. Atheist. Wow. He may have even been an atheist. And this argument is the thing that brought him back to the fold, so to speak.
Golly.
Yeah. And it's worked on me too. If you want to call, I mean, I didn't go away. I've always been here.
Yeah.
But it's really brought me to the level of confidence that I have now.
This is great. I mean, not all Christians need to be apologists. Not all Christians need to be wrestling with these deep philosophical questions. It's important that some do, so that they can help us explain it to others, I think. But I think if nothing else, it kind of, because people will often point to it and say, what's the point of it? There's no reason. But yeah, it kind of, it buoys you up when you have those sort of irrational doubts.
Right, it shores you up. Exactly. Yeah, it can work to sort of put your irrational doubts to...
Yeah.
So this is, I was going to tell a story about Josh and Dr. Craig. He was, as he was an agnostic or an atheist, he went up to Dr. Craig and he had all of these objections to the Kalam. And Josh is very, very intelligent. And Craig said that on his podcast. He's just like, or on your podcast. Super
Did he call him scary
guy.
smart, or was that just Oppie he called him? I forget.
I think he called Alex Proust scary smart.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, but I think Josh falls into the same category.
Okay.
Josh is a little bit more docile. He's just very super friendly, so he doesn't come across
cool.
that way.
Yeah.
Anyways, Josh, if you're watching this, I love you. So he says he went up to Dr. Craig and he was going to give him all of these like knockdown arguments against the Kalam. Yeah, and I wanted to point out that Josh is super smart. So he has like his objections were not going to be terrible.
Right.
And he had a discussion with Craig, and he came away and Craig responded to all of his arguments against the Kalam. And that really built like rapport with Josh. He was like, there's a lot more going on with Dr. Craig than meets the eye. Because all you see with Dr. Craig is like his debates and his public stuff.
Two premises, conclusions.
Yeah, and you don't realize how much is going on beneath the surface.
Wow.
He's very unassuming.
You might say, like an iceberg.
Like an iceberg, exactly.
Well, that's amazing.
But no,
really
Josh
cool.
Josh is great. He and I have become friends over the past couple years. And
Gosh, I would love to get him on this show.
He also has a YouTube channel called Worldview Design.
Okay.
So if people want to check him out, he's on YouTube. I think he's at about a little over 1,000 subscribers, so he needs a lot of help.
Okay, yeah. Well, remind me if we don't, but it would be good to put a link in the show notes to Josh since we're talking about so much.
I'm sure he'd love to come on and chat with you too.
I'd be honored. Let's talk a little bit about proper basicality, reformed epistemology, which is interesting because in Plantinga's work on Christian warrant, what's that called, that book?
Warranted Christian Belief.
Warranted Christian Belief. He calls it, this Thomistic Calvin model. Mm-hmm. And that really surprised me because Aquinas states emphatically that one can come to know God exists apart from divine revelation. Mm-hmm. This is something you can know, so you don't need faith to know God exists, though you can have faith if you're not smart enough like me and you don't have the time, perhaps, to investigate these things to your liking. But I was surprised that he mentioned Aquinas, and so I actually went in and tried to find where Aquinas talked about this. I found a few places, so I'd like to kind of bring some of that up in a minute.
Go for it.
Yeah, because...
Well, should I kind of introduce
maybe
why
introduce
this is all relevant?
us and tell us what it is.
Yeah, so Reformed epistemology is a view that sort of came out of this time when everyone was thinking, you've got to have arguments for your belief in God, otherwise you're not rational. And so what Plantinga did, and this was revolutionary back when it happened, back in the 70s, is he said, actually, we can be skeptical about that premise. And so the argument basically runs like this. If you have a rational belief in God, then you need arguments. Mm-hmm. Premise 2, there are no good arguments for theism. And then the conclusion, so you're not rational, basically. And so most people, most theists, most Christians have been responding to that second premise. That the second premise says there are no good arguments for God's existence or for Christianity. So most theists have been looking at that second premise saying, oh no, there are good arguments. There is good evidence for Christianity. And so what Plantinga did is he looked at that first premise. He said, well, hey, it's not actually true that if you have a rational belief in God, then you need arguments. What he says is that's not true. And the reason why is because on his view, depends on what we'd have to probably get a little bit more clear on what we're looking at here. Because in epistemology, there's different kinds of properties that we could be talking about. And one of them is called justification. So someone is justified in their belief. Mm-hmm. Actually, in philosophy, there's like a bunch of different views on justification too. Mm-hmm. And tell me if I'm giving too many caveats as we're like just starting this.
Maybe a little too many.
Okay, we're giving too many caveats as we're starting this.
Yep.
But the point is, the basic overall picture is that we don't need arguments in order to have a rationally justified belief in God. And so the way that he does it, we can get into in a little bit. How about that?
Yeah, sounds good.
But that's the basic overall picture.
Why don't we talk about some other things that are sort of properly basic? What does properly basic mean, and what are some examples of properly basic beliefs? Okay,
so properly basic belief, we probably need to split that term into two. So let's put aside the proper part of it for a second and just think about what a basic belief is. A basic belief is a belief that is not based on other beliefs that you have. So here's one example. So suppose that I go to the casino and I just find myself believing my next role or my next play, I'm going to become a millionaire. Suppose I just have that belief. Okay. That belief wouldn't be based on anything deeper. So it'd be a basic belief. It wouldn't be based on some deeper belief. But that wouldn't be a rational belief. So it wouldn't be properly basic. So a properly basic belief is a basic belief that is just rational to hold.
Thank you for that distinction.
Yeah.
I wasn't aware of that before.
So the proper part of it, I can give another example of that. Suppose that you're experiencing pain, someone punched you in the arm, you just hurt your leg. Right? Doing, what was it, CrossFit?
I was chasing a friend at the botanical gardens.
Super manly.
Yeah.
Cool. So you hurt your leg and you find yourself believing, I'm in a lot of pain.
Yep.
That is not based on some deeper belief or some deeper argument. But in that context, since you're experiencing pain, completely rational, perfectly, you're justified in that belief. And so that would be a properly basic belief.
But then you hear of these people who are amputees and have these sort of phantom scratches.
Oh, right.
That would be a basic belief that isn't proper.
So on that one, you would say that it's not proper because you'd have a defeater for that belief. So this would introduce, like, you can have a properly basic belief as something that is justified in case you don't have some kind of defeater that could potentially come and defeat it. So a defeater is just some other reason that you have to think that belief is false. So looking down and seeing that you're an amputee and you don't have the rest of your arm would count as a defeater of your belief. And so it would no longer be properly basic. It'd still be a basic belief, but it would no longer be properly basic because you have a defeater for it.
And this is different, I guess. It's not that you're not rational to have this experience. There's sort of neurological reasons people have this experience. But if you were to conclude, I must have fingers because that's where I feel the itch. And
it wouldn't be properly basic. It would be, you could still have that as a basic belief, not based on any deeper belief.
Okay.
But it wouldn't be rational for you to continue believing that. Or you wouldn't be justified.
Now, I already mentioned this earlier, and we haven't talked about this, and I assume you're the kind of guy who would find this interesting. When I was about 15 years old, I went through this terrifying period where I was skeptical that other people existed.
I've never met anyone like that, by the way.
Yeah, and it's not to say I came to hold that belief, so I wasn't a solipsist, I certainly didn't claim it, I didn't even know what that word was. I remember I was like 15 years old, and I would this isn't exactly the same, but I would shut the door to my bedroom and then wonder if everything outside of my bedroom disappeared. Like maybe it all fell into the void and was nothing. I'd quickly open it to see if I could catch it.
How old were you?
15. And I remember once, like, how do I know my friend Gareth and Rowan, who I would hang out with at school, how do I know they exist right now? Like, I guess you could tell me they were doing something, maybe I could call them, but maybe they came into existence when I called them, or maybe they don't exist, but this experience is leading me to think that. And I thought, well, maybe they don't exist. Like, maybe it's some sort of an illusion. And I hadn't thought it through. I didn't try to make it rational or give a good explanation for why it was the case. Because again, it's not that I thought it was the case, I was just afraid that it was.
Yeah.
I remember sitting with my friend Gareth in the library and actually saying to him, like, sometimes, like, I'm afraid other people don't exist. Like, I'm afraid you don't exist. And he said to me, he must have been afraid for me, because he's like, okay, but I promise I do. And I'm like, but that's what you would say. So there you go. You've now met somebody who actually struggled with that belief. It's fair dinkum. True.
Wow.
Yeah. But this gets to the point, because we look around and we see other human beings, but we don't see their minds. If we were to, not that we would, crack their head open, we might see their brain. We're still not seeing their minds. They might be very sophisticated robots that look like humans, and I can't know that directly, but I assume it to be true. Is this an example of a properly basic belief, the existence of other minds?
I would say yes. It would be an example of a properly basic belief. You can. I think that very few of our beliefs are actually the result of some, like, argument or some process that you went through.
Totally.
Yeah,
like
and
who my parents are.
Right, exactly. Where you were born. The fact that I am in Georgia right now.
Totally.
That is not based on an argument. I believe that.
Or if you were to formulate an argument, it would be based on premises you can't prove.
Well, this is one thing to point out, is that a basic belief can turn into a non-basic belief if you just sort of focus your attention on it and be like, well, wait a second, I probably need to have some argument for why this belief is true.
Oh, I see.
And so you can turn a basic belief into a non-basic belief.
Gotcha.
But in our everyday lives, in our everyday experience, most of our beliefs are the basic kind, where they're not...
Like, what about this? Like, it's possible. You tell me what this belief is. This is just fun. It's possible that Neil is a Russian spy that has been sent here from Russia to assure the next election or something. That's possible. I have no good reason to think that it's true, But if I was to say that to you and you were trying to convince me that he was a Russian spy, you would say, well, wouldn't you think that would be the case? Like, of course you wouldn't think that if he's the legit Russian spy. Or maybe my wife is a Russian spy and she's just pretending to love me.
Yeah, I would just say that that's not a properly basic belief. So it'd be basic, but there would be no...
But my point is, I'm justified at taking him at his word. I'm justified...
If he told you that?
No. If I'm justified at thinking he's not a Russian spy.
Oh, okay.
I'm justified in thinking you're Cameron Bertuzzi and that you have a brother called Trevor, even though I have no other way of knowing that.
Right, even though all you have is my testimony.
That's
Me
right.
just telling you.
So would testimony be an example of basic belief if you say something and I accept it?
So... The way that I think about it, the way that it works in my mind, is you can have something like testimony, but you're not building an argument in your mind of like, the best explanation of why this person told me this is that it's true.
Yeah.
All that's happening is they're telling you something, and you immediately find yourself believing.
This is really helpful to me. Thank you for showing me that a properly basic or basic belief can become an unbasic belief by reflecting upon it. I never made that connection before, and that really helps.
Yeah, well, Plantinga points that out too.
Okay.
A basic belief that you have can turn into a non-basic one.
Give us the example of the reality of the past. I find this fascinating too.
Okay. So the reality of the past, imagine that, and this is actually kind of difficult for some people to think about, but it's possible that the past is illusory, that it's all an illusion that sort of came up in your brain.
Or even began to exist 5 minutes ago.
It began to exist with the appearance of age 5 minutes ago.
Food in our stomachs we haven't yet digested, rusting cars, crumbling mountains, the whole thing's baked in.
It started like that, and it just appears real.
Yes.
All of your memories, everything, it just appears that it's older than it is. It's interesting. Some young earth creationists actually believe that.
I know.
Yeah. But anyways, so let's take that theory. What's your best argument against that theory?
Yeah, it's great. Like, what's my best argument? I haven't even thought about that. I guess if you were just to kind of pull me off the street and say that, my best argument would be, it doesn't seem that way and you don't have a positive reason for it.
Yeah, so you'd say, you would basically fall back on how things seem to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so you're going to have to sort of, with this belief in particular, you'd have to fall back on something like this is just a basic belief that I have. It just seems obvious.
It seems obvious to me.
To me that the past is real.
And suppose I trusted you and you're like, no, dude, really, listen to me. I'd be like, okay, well, then you're going to have to give me more. Like, give me a reason to think you're right.
Yeah.
And if you couldn't, I would say, well, you're not, I can't go with you there.
Yeah.
There's no good reason to think that the past is illusory. Therefore, I'm going to go on believing what seems apparent to me.
Yeah, right. Right. And so there's a whole lot of things that are at play in this when we actually look at some of the details. But there's an example that I really like to think about a lot, and this is another one from Alvin Plantinga, is he says, well, suppose that you, the night before, were up late reading some book on Aquinas, say, and the next day you're accused of murder. And they say that you murdered somebody the night before. Yeah. But you know that you didn't commit the murder. You know that you were sitting at home reading Thomas Aquinas. But then suppose that they start to give you some good evidence. Like maybe they say that your fingerprint was found at the crime scene. And maybe there's some like blood on your pants or something that they found in your home. And what he says is that you would still completely be within your rights to believe that you were not the murderer because you remember what you did last night and you were reading your book. And so even in the face of potential counter evidence, the rational, proper thing to do, not in every circumstance, but in some circumstances, is to go on believing what seems to you to be the case. And we also know that, like, you know, evidence can be fabricated. You can fabricate DNA evidence.
No, that's good, because my first thought was, I guess if enough evidence was compiled and shown to me, I would begin to question my own sanity.
Right, yeah, no, it's, yeah, so
But then I would have to say, well, do I have any good reason to think I'm mentally unsound? Because if I don't have any good reason to think that, then that would be another point.
So this is where defeaters can come in. So he's really open to the fact that you can have a defeater come in and sort of defeat your basic belief as being no longer properly basic. But it depends on the situation, how much evidence that would require, how sure you are that you were really there the night before reading Thomas Aquinas. Mm-hmm. So we'd have to look at the particulars of the case.
Sure.
So you can't just say in every circumstance it would be rational for you to continue believing what seems to you to be the case. But in certain circumstances, I think it is. And
Yes,
you
it
can
is,
have a
yeah.
lot of counter evidence, and it just, bro, that's not enough. Like, I can have a lot of evidence that we're in the Matrix, or someone could give me a lot of evidence that we were in the Matrix, and I'd be like, bro, you're crazy. Like, I don't care if you think you have evidence that the external world is fake, but I'm not going to believe that. Like, it really seems to me to be the case that the external world is real. It really seems to me to be a case that the past is not an illusion, that it was real. You know, that I was born in 1987 and I've been around for that length of time. Like, it really seems like that's... So in some cases, that's what's really interesting about this view, and to sort of bring out some of the thoughts that you don't necessarily have to have an argument for all of your beliefs. And sometimes your basic belief can defeat arguments or potential counter evidence to your belief. And to be rational, there's a whole process that needs to happen. You got to weigh both sides. And so it's not just like this thing that's, you're not always going to be rational in saying, well, you know, that counter evidence is not enough. But in some circumstances, it will be.
Okay, so then bring this to theism. What about God and our experience of God? What's Plantinga's argument here?
So Plantinga's view is that just like we do with other minds, typically, like when I'm thinking or looking at my wife or interacting with her, I believe that my wife, she has her own mind, she has her own thoughts and intentions and desires, and I've never based my belief that my wife has a mind on some argument. Like, I've never done that. All right? And so, let's think about the objection that we had earlier, the argument. If belief in Brittany's mind is rational, then you need arguments. There are no good arguments that Brittany has a mind, and the conclusion, therefore, you shouldn't believe that Brittany has a mind. So I actually agree with number 2. There are no good arguments that other people have minds. And this is one thing that Alvin Plantinga, he's got a whole book on it, where he basically shows that the arguments that people have offered over the centuries for belief and for the conclusion that people have minds, really, and it's not just like philosophical zombies running around everywhere.
Yeah.
Those arguments are actually not very good arguments. And so you can agree with that second premise, but then you would just reject the first one. That if I'm rational in believing that Brittany has a mind, then I have to have arguments. You don't have to have arguments. Who says you have to have arguments? And so using that analogy, he says, well, we can basically do the same thing with God. So we don't necessarily have to have arguments for this belief, just like I don't need arguments to believe that my wife has a mind. It's obvious to me, and that seems perfectly rational, in the absence of a defeater. Like, I don't have a defeater. I'm not in possession of a reason to think that my wife doesn't have a mind. And so I should believe that my wife has a mind. I'm not in possession of a defeater of my belief in Christianity or in God's existence, and so therefore I have no reason to reject it. I'm perfectly justified and rational and warranted in maintaining this belief.
I could see why the atheist would think this might be something of a cheeky move, because it seems to kind of allow you to believe what you want to believe without an argument. And then you are in the position of saying to the atheist, well, give me a reason to think God does not exist. Now, we should make some things clear. If somebody says, I think I have a properly basic belief in God's existence, this isn't an argument for God's existence.
Right.
And so if it were, then you would have to offer evidences or something, or an argument. So if I want to convince you of God's existence, then I do need an argument. I can't just appeal to my properly basic belief, right?
Right.
But
this is actually a really important thing to raise here. So this goes back to Plantinga's whole project. His whole idea was not to give an argument for Christianity, or even an argument that Christians are justified or are rational or are warranted. That was never the goal. The goal is to show that de facto, and I'll explain what these terms mean, de facto objections against Christianity. Well, let me back up. There are no de jure objections against Christianity that don't sort of reduce to de facto objections. So a de facto objection against Christianity would be an argument that Christianity is false. De facto, I guess that's Latin. The argument there would be that Christianity is false. What he says is that there's no, well, let me back up and explain what de jure means. De jure is an argument that this person is not rational in their belief. And so what he says is that if you want to argue that the Christian is irrational, or unjustified or unwarranted in their belief in God's existence, you can't stay on the level of rationality or justification. You've got to move to the level of fact. You've got to argue that Christianity is false. And the way that he does this is he gives basically two conditional statements. The first conditional is, if God exists, then Christian belief can be warranted. If God exists, then Christianity can be warranted. And the second conditional is, if God does not exist, then probably belief in God is not warranted. So the whole strategy is to sort of...
I think I'd quibble with both of those to understand them a little more.
Okay, yeah, so it's sort of based on his outworking, and this is, I was trying to give some of these clarifying words and use a lot more epistemology jargon at the beginning, because it is eventually going to come into play.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll get into it, maybe we won't.
No, don't be afraid to use it.
Yeah, but so the idea...
Because I would say if the Christian God exists,
yeah,
then we can have belief in God can be properly basic.
Yeah, right.
Right. But the Christian God might not exist, but God might still exist, in which case you might be able to say that belief in some sort of mind outside of us that created the world and sustains it, you might be able to say that is properly basic, but not that Christ rose from the dead and that he lives in my heart and all that stuff.
So the Christian in this circumstance is not saying that Christian belief is warranted or is justified or is rational. They're saying it can be. It can be. And that's where this sort of conditional statement comes in. And it's really just about showing that the atheist has a lot more work to do. If they want to say that the Christian is in fact irrational or unjustified in her belief, then they've got to argue that Christianity is false. Because if Christianity is true, then Christians can have warrant. They can have justification if you accept that conditional statement.
I like it. Yeah, it makes sense.
Which Plantinga defends in his book.
You know, another thing to point out is many of us have gotten into this where we've begun binging Dr. William Lane Craig debates, and maybe after this they're going to go listen to Josh Rasmussen, and they're going to start reading his books and seeing his exchanges. It is possible, right, to become so hung up on debates and weighing the evidences for and against that it gets in the way of your relationship with God, in the same way that if I were to start doing a deep dive into solipsism, this would get in the way of my relationship with my wife and kids.
Yep.
And I think there's...
Like, what is the best argument that your wife has a mind and loves you?
Yeah, if I started doing that, I wouldn't be... Like, I wouldn't take her out I might take her on a date night, but it would just be to see if she was actually real and had a mind and stuff. Do you see? Like, it could potentially ruin my relationships with those I hold most dear. Likewise, I think someone can become so obsessed with arguments and evidences for God's existence in Christianity that it could, maybe ruin or at least hamper one's relationship with Christ.
I agree.
Yeah.
I totally agree. I've noticed that in my own life, my own walk too.
Have you? Can I read a bit about what Thomas Aquinas says? So he says something in the Summa Theologiae about it. That's his main work. We're resting our mics on two of the versions there. And then he has another work called the Summa Contra Gentiles, or a summary of the faith against the Gentiles, which is more apologetic in nature, so it's really fun. But why don't I start reading it, and then we could kind of pause and see what we think. He says, there is a certain and general and vague knowledge of God in the minds of practically all men, whether it be by the fact of God's existence being a self-evident truth, as some think, he doesn't, or as seems more likely because natural reasoning leads a man promptly to some sort of knowledge of God. For men, seeing that natural things follow a certain course and order, and further considering that order cannot be without an ordainer, they perceive generally that there is some ordainer of the things which we see, but who or what manner of being the ordainer of nature is, and whether he be one or many, cannot be gathered offhand from this slight study. He says more, but I don't want to bore everybody by reading directly from Aquinas.
Yeah, so that seems perfectly in line with what Plantinga argues. I think what he's targeting is it's general theistic belief.
Yeah, that's right.
Not specific.
That's right.
Christian belief.
That's what I wanted to dive into.
So Plantinga has a whole chapter where he basically looks at the Aquinas Calvin model is what he calls it, where you have this sort of generic belief about God, and that can be perfectly rational, warranted, justified, without arguments. It can be properly basic. It can be, and again, the emphasis is on can be. It's possible that they can have this kind of warrant, and yeah. But then he has another chapter where he extends the model to include beliefs about the great truths of the Christian faith. And the way that he does that is he introduces the witness of the Holy Spirit.
Right. And this is, I think, more Calvin at this point. That's my understanding.
Calvin, I'm actually not sure on the history of what Calvin argued in terms of whether or not Christian belief in particular can be justified apart from arguments. But either way, he Planting extends the model to include the witness of the Holy Spirit, which would work the same way that testimony works more generally. We used an example earlier. What was the example that we used of testimony? If you told me something,
you would accept it.
I would just accept it. And so basically,
if I told you, I grew up in Australia, but I was born in Russia, you'd be like, oh, cool.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if I had good reason to think that you weren't lying and you're a trustworthy person, and I didn't think you were joking, then that's what I would find myself believing, and it would be perfectly within, it'd be perfectly rational for me to believe that. So the same thing could be true of Christianity. So the witness of the Holy Spirit could confirm in our hearts and seal it on our hearts, so to speak, that the great truths of the gospel are in fact true as we're reading through the word or as it's being preached to us. And so that's the way to sort of extend the model, his version of the model to the great Christian truths. And you don't necessarily have to go with him on this extended model.
Right.
You could just stick with
Aquinas
the generic
seems more modest.
belief.
I mean, there might be a lot that I'm not reading in Aquinas, but what I'm seeing seems to be more of a general and vague sense of God that we have. Yeah. And it's interesting because he actually uses the existence of other people as he kind of connects the two. Listen to this. Thus, seeing a man move and do other acts, we perceive that there is in him a cause of these activities, which is not in other things, make up. And this cause we call the soul, and still we do not yet know what the soul is, whether it is anything corporeal or not, or how it performs the aforesaid acts. Now such knowledge as this cannot possibly suffice for happiness. And then he goes on, for happiness must be an activity without defect, and maybe I'll stop there. But that's a really interesting thing. Like I see
He kind of makes
I kind of infer a mind, even if I don't really know what a mind is. I infer it. If you ask me to explain it, whether it's physical or not, I might not know how to do that. Likewise, I look around the world and I see, that things seem to act for an end that's good. They seem ordered, orderly, and I just sort of come to this belief in some sort of ordainer.
Yeah. So I think Planting acknowledges that. In the book, he realizes that Aquinas is not trying to go all the way to all of these specific Christian beliefs and saying that those can be properly basic.
Because I could see another thing Christians would run into, a problem they would run into if they wanted to push that too far. You would say, well, if that were the case, then Christians ought to be a whole lot more unified in what they believe than they are. If they want to say that the reason they believe Christ rose from the dead and that hell exists, and that whatever doctrine you want to slip in there, you can be as modest or as liberal as you want. But if you wanted to push it the whole way, you'd run into a problem, I would think. You would just have to look around and say, well, all these Christians who disagree with me aren't being influenced by the Holy Spirit properly.
Yeah, I would just... the thing that initially comes to my mind would be that sin actually plays a part in the whole... the planning a strategy. And so sin could explain some disagreement on some level. So, and maybe you could explain disagreement some other way. Maybe you wouldn't have to appeal to sin, some innate thing that we all have that bias and whatever else.
Now, what in your experience, what has been the atheist objection to this?
One popular, you raised it earlier, was just that this seems like you're just trying to defend something that you grew up believing, and you can basically use the same strategy. Actually, the best. Let me start over.
Sure.
Yeah. The most common objection that I see from atheists about this was why can't the Mormon or someone else use the same strategy in order to justify their beliefs about Mormonism or Buddhism or Hinduism or whatever? And so one of the things that I like to point out with this is, again, we're not arguing that Christians are actually justified or actually warranted in their beliefs. We're just saying that this is a possibility. And so if you want to argue that the Christian is actually irrational, is actually unjustified, then you've got to argue that Christianity is false. That's literally the whole goal of this argument.
Gotcha.
So if you're trying to make it do something that it was never intended to do, then you're trying to go further than the argument ever intended to go.
That makes
So
sense.
that's one point. The second point is that I think that people can have justified false beliefs. And I think that's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
So
The Russia example, would that be an example? Like if I told you I was born in Russia and grew up in Australia,
and I
that would
believed
be a
you,
justified
if I believed you based
false
on your
belief,
testimony,
wouldn't it?
yeah, it'd be a justified false belief.
Yeah.
One example that I like to give a lot is belief that the Earth was flat before we had evidence that the Earth is round. Pretty much everybody thought the Earth was flat, and based on their experience of the world, it was a completely justified belief for them to have, even though it was false. But people are very averse to that. They don't want to accept that people can have justified false beliefs. But I think that's wrong. I think that we've got to acknowledge that even though it's false to us, they could have some level of justification. And so at that point, all that we would do is just talk to them about the truth.
Well,
of
it's
the
the same
matter.
thing with my kids. I mean, we talk about the sun setting and the sun rising, and you ask a child what's happening, they would say, I guess the sun goes up and down. And they would probably come to the conclusion that the sun goes around the earth, which would be a justified false belief.
Right. And so at that point, what we would do is present them with a defeater for their belief. And so that if we wanted to progress the conversation, we'd acknowledge, yes, they can have a justified, they can have a justified belief in this. That's fine. But then we'd offer them a defeater and we talk to them and say, well, this is why your belief is false. So it's not that difficult of an objection to get around, in my view.
Very good. What else do you want to talk about?
I don't know. What do you want to talk about?
I don't know. I feel like we've done pretty good. D&D, contingency, proper basicality.
We haven't talked about anxiety.
Oh, let's do that. You wanted to talk about that.
Yeah, we haven't talked about anxiety a whole lot.
Yeah. How do we get into that? I mean, you said you wanted to talk about anxiety, and I'm glad that you want to, because you said we don't talk about it enough in kind of Christian circles. So, yeah, take the lead. Why do you want to talk about it?
Well, like you said, I don't think it's talked about enough, and I don't have anything prepared on this. I just want to talk about it.
Sure.
And this could be therapeutic for me. I don't know.
It might be helpful for me too.
Yeah, maybe.
Because everyone's talking about anxiety today, and it makes me wonder if it's kind of the same way everyone talked about being allergic to peanuts 5 minutes ago, and whether I want to believe them or not. You know what I mean? Like we're all allergic to gluten all of a sudden, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
You're like, are you though? Or
or is it just something that...
Yeah, and what do we mean by anxiety? So you struggle with anxiety, is that...
Apparently I do, yeah.
And what was your experience like that? How do you know that you do? And what does anxiety really mean? I actually don't really... I'm not terribly sure what people mean by that.
That is a good question, and I'm like...
I'm not trying to turn this into a philosophical discussion. Is it just a sort of like a fear? Is that what it is? Is it...
Yeah, it could be a fear, but I think what it does is it activates your fight or flight mechanism. And so, yeah, if you get super anxious or super nervous about something, your body basically, and that's what panic attacks are, is your body's like automatically wanting to like run away from the situation, and your heart rate starts to increase because like you think that there's some kind of threat nearby or whatever. Like there's a lot of evolutionary stuff going on biology wise. Whether or not you believe in evolution doesn't matter. I'm just saying that there's biological stuff happening that can contribute to everything, and that's actually something that's really important. Is that a lot of times we think that doubts are just based on reason and rationality, but what I've learned through this process is that sometimes our doubts can be driven by something else, by anxiety, and so we think that we're having this rational doubt about Christianity, but really what's going on is it could even be like a chemical imbalance in your brain that's causing you to doubt and causing you not to think rationally about something. There's a thing in the anxiety literature called catastrophizing. And that's what I do. That's
Cameron, he's talking about anxiety. I'm pretty sure. You want to sit around? He's probably describing me.
Sure.
Catastrophizing. What's that?
Catastrophizing is when all you can think about is one remote possibility, and that's all you're just obsessing about it.
Yeah, I don't know if that's me.
It's like, what if
the tree and you can't see the forest? All you see.
My problem is, you know how people say you can't see the trees from the forest or something? My problem is I can't see the forest from the trees. So I'll find like if I'm in a good mood, things are going well. If this tree is wellness, then I am really happy. But if my wife and I get into an argument, everything is going up in flames and I cannot see. So I kind of micro...
Yeah, that doesn't sound like catastrophizing.
Okay. So
necessarily, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so catastrophizing...
That's some other issue. What's this one?
So catastrophizing would be that you're just thinking, like... you're thinking about all these bad consequences of what could happen. Like if something else could be true. If Christianity is false, then, oh my God, that's like the worst thing in the world. And it's just super, super, super bad. And that would cause all of this anxiety for you. And it causes like this loop of anxiety.
Yeah.
But what I've come to realize is that sometimes your doubts or your like what ifs are driven, they can be driven by your own chemistry, your body chemistry. They can be driven by your own bad behaviors that you sort of built up over the years. And the reason why I've come to that conclusion is because when people are treated with medication, their doubts start to stop controlling them anymore. There was a philosopher friend of mine who dealt really bad with OCD. And it, like any what if, it didn't matter, like it didn't have anything to do with God's existence or anything. It was just like, what if I leave my house and like a meteor comes and strikes me down? And like that enough can like cripple him to like not go outside and just like lock himself in his room and not do anything. And
so he started taking medication and found that helpful?
Exactly. So he wasn't crippled by these doubts, these what ifs anymore.
How is this part of your story then?
It's part of my story because I went down the medication route and it helped a little bit, but now I'm doing something else that's now helping. And it's called cognitive behavioral therapy. And I'm not doing like
Jerry, did Jerry talk to you about that last night?
No, he didn't.
Okay. I think that's his thing.
But I'm not doing it officially. I'm sort of doing my own things that I've discovered that are helping.
So this is non-medicinal stuff.
It's non-medicinal right now. Right. But the point is that I've found that if you've built up, and sometimes it's just chemistry, sometimes it's just brain chemistry that's causing all of these things, and that sometimes needs to be treated by medication. But other times it's just bad behaviors. Like you're letting your brain focus on this one what if, this one catastrophe that could happen. And you get in this cycle of like, oh, all of this anxiety just continues to build and build and build. And so what cognitive behavioral therapy does is it stops that cycle. Is it says,
where do you start to go off the track?
You're not allowed to continue thinking about that. You got to change your behavior. Good. Like one of the things that I deal with is health anxiety, and this all happened very recently for me. Health stuff. I was never conscious of my health when I was growing up, but it all happened fairly recently, back in September when I had my first panic attack on my way to work.
Tell me what that was like, if you don't mind, because
goodness,
I've never had it, and people
terrible.
explain them to me, and I'm like, gosh, that sounds...
Oh, I'd never had one, so I didn't know what it was.
So what was happening? What does it feel like?
So I was on my way to work, and one of my coworkers texted me and said, it just said, hey, are you on your way, or something about the day. And that was enough to like trigger, because at the time I was dealing with a lot of stress at work. Didn't want to be there. They didn't want me there. And they eventually let me go like a month later after it happened. So it was a really bad situation. It was causing me a ton of stress, tons of anxiety. So on my way to work, I get this text and I just feel like anxiety, like normal anxiety, but
like a tightening in the body, that sort of thing.
Just like my hands start to get clammy and my heart rate kind of picks up a little bit. Everybody experiences something different.
Yeah.
But as I was going on my way to work, I felt like this rush of blood through my feet and through my hands, and then my heart started like pounding in my chest, and I thought I was having a heart attack. I was like, I have no idea what's happening. And it was like a cycle. Like I would have the rushing feeling, then my heart would start pounding, and then it would go away. And then maybe a minute later, it started again, and the whole cycle started to repeat. And that was a panic attack, I learned later. I like immediately turned around and went to the hospital, and they checked me out and put EKGs all over me and everything, and they said, no, you're fine. Your heart looks good. Everything looks fine. So it was just a panic attack. But that was the first time I ever experienced anything like that.
Wow.
So, and since then, I've had more panic attacks. Apparently, once you've had one, it's a lot easier to have more.
Man, that's unfortunate.
Yeah. And
it's unfair.
And I like I said, before that happened, I never had, what am I trying to say? I didn't deal with health anxiety before it happened. But after it happened, I really started to think, oh my gosh, I have kids now. What would have happened if I did just die on my way to work? And so that started this catastrophizing, health anxiety, all this stuff. What I realized is eventually over time, after reading some books and starting to go through some of the literature on anxiety, was that some of the behaviors that I was doing was completely just like making everything worse. And so what I was doing was I would get on Google, and anytime I had a new symptom of something, I would get on Google and be like, okay, what is this new symptom? And that I learned later on, that's one of my triggers.
Yeah.
So I eventually stopped doing that, even though like I don't know what this new thing is. Like I have this new pain in my back, or this new pain in my chest or my arm or whatever. I'm like, this has got to be something. Like I have cancer now in this area of my body, and that's what the anxiety-driven brain does, which again can apply to belief about God. That's why I think it's so important that we talk about this. That maybe your doubt, maybe your anxiety, or doubts about God's existence are not rational. They're just based on these bad behaviors that you've built up, or this chemistry that's going on in your mind, that if you got that sorted out, you would no longer be driven by these doubts.
I don't doubt that what you're bringing up is a good point. I just want to play the devil's advocate here, because we as Christians know how insulting it is when an atheist looks at us and says, like, you're just deluded. Like, you're actually like, you're sick in the brain, and like belief is a disease, and you just need to be treated. It should be legitimately in the DSM so that you can be treated. And it kind of sounds like you're saying maybe the opposite is true. Like, well, if you don't believe, then maybe there's just something mentally wrong with you, and that could be insulting to people who are genuinely seeking God and can't find him.
That's a good point that we could clarify here. So I'm not saying that everybody is experiencing this and all doubt is irrational. I'm saying that some doubt can be irrational and can be driven by these factors. And I think it actually happens in more cases than we'd like to admit. That's one of the things that's super interesting to me, is that a lot of people have said, it's really weird that you are so open about your anxiety. And to me, like, I don't understand why people are so, like, they don't want to talk about it. Mm-hmm. I've just never understood that.
I think it's really cool that you are like that.
I'm totally open to talking about it, because if it's an irrational part of me that's causing all of these things, like, again, I think it goes back to the insecurities. If it's a legit criticism, then it shouldn't bother me. But if it's not a legit criticism, still shouldn't bother me. So then so anyways, I'm not saying that all doubt is irrational. I think that some doubt can be completely rational and is not driven by anxiety. But I think that the fact of the matter is that so many people deal with anxiety. And so for some people, this is going to be very relevant. And I know people, like in my own experience, who have been they've struggled with some of these doubts that are caused by brain chemistry, that the only way that they got it sorted out was to get on medication. And it's not just about God's existence. It was this kind of catastrophizing about other areas, about just anything. Going to work, you can't get in your car to go to work because what if I get in a crash and I die? What if this happens? This bad consequence. So it's not just about God's existence. I think anxiety afflicts a lot of people, and it's a potential pitfall that could be cured, in a sense, if you either get on the right medication or you take the right steps and you stop these bad behaviors from leading to all of these potential bad things. Like I mentioned about this philosopher friend of mine who struggled with OCD. He told me that after he got on the right medication, he was no longer like experiencing these crippling doubts. And for him, it was obviously just a brain chemistry thing. And once you can get rid of those crippling doubts that are just like overriding your mental capacities, then you can really start to think rationally about something instead of just being driven to all of these skeptical conclusions because of these underlying biological or things that are going on beneath the surface that you're just not recognizing. You think, and that's because we like to think that we're just rational creatures. Like I'm just a rational person, just really looking at the evidence,
assessing the data.
Yeah, from an unbiased perspective. When in reality, there's stuff going on beneath the surface, and this could be a big cause of that. Could
you maybe give me an example of how you use this sort of, what did you call it, cognitive behavioral therapy, in a non-religious sense? So what is it, something when your thoughts start to go off the track, maybe it has to do with family or friendships or career, and you realize it, would you mind leading us down there? What do you do? How does that work? Yeah,
so this is unorthodox, and I don't recommend this for
you're
everybody.
Not a therapist. We're not giving therapy advice.
Right, but this is what I started doing, and it's helped me. And again, what I deal with is health anxiety. That's like the number one source of my anxiety right now. It's not talking with atheists online. Like I still get nervous and I get anxiety when I'm about to go on and speak with somebody. And even sometimes when I interact with people that I disagree with online, but it's never been at the level where it's caused a panic attack or anything like that. It's really just health anxiety that's my main source of anxiety, like the serious anxiety. So what I've started to do when I notice that like I get a pain somewhere in my body, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what is this? What's happening? What's the cause of this? Is this something really serious that's going to lead to this thing? So just all the typical signs of catastrophizing.
Mm-hmm.
What I do is I'll like wake myself out of that by like punching myself in the leg, or like causing pain somewhere on my body.
Yeah.
And that immediately pulls me out and like brings me back to the real world. And this is a strategy I actually learned from
it kind of takes you out of your head, doesn't it? Physical pain brings you out of yourself.
Yeah, nothing brings you back to reality like pain. Like just like intense pain somewhere else on your body. And I've had experiences where like I'll have a pain that's like right here in my chest. And anxiety can cause that. Anxiety can cause pain in your chest. And it feels like, man, this is just like a real pain that I'm experiencing. Like, what is this? And I'll do something like I'll punch myself in the arm or like cause pain somewhere. And again, this sounds really weird.
No, I do the same thing. Can I be honest with you?
Yeah.
This is a bit embarrassing, but I had a bad night's sleep last night, and there's times that you're talking to me, I'm following you, but I start glazing over. You know how when you glaze over, you have to kind of do that?
Yeah.
That doesn't look good on camera. So what I've been doing occasionally, and this is not because you're uninteresting, everything it's fascinating, I'm pinching myself. I've probably done like 2 or 3 times in this interview. We're chatting, and I'll start to glaze over, and I'll pinch myself.
You may
like,
just have ACD.
Whoa.
ADD? What is that?
Oh, I definitely have ADD, but that's not the problem. The problem is I'm exhausted. And so, but that's interesting because it's like it's something similar to what you're saying. It's just sort of like it brings you out of yourself. Did you hear what he's saying about like pain and stuff?
Well, and I've noticed that like when I have this pain in my chest, I'll like punch myself in the leg really hard.
Yeah.
I'm not hurting myself.
You're not bruising yourself.
I'm not bruising myself. I'm just like causing enough pain to bring my mind, like snap my mind out of it, to stop that bad behavior, basically.
I wonder if people have, I think I've heard people talk about having a rubber band around their arm.
Oh, and just slapping it.
And
I've
snapping
heard of that.
it.
Yeah.
I've heard that. I can't vouch for it, of course. But
yeah, and it's weird how effective it is. It's really weird.
Yeah.
Like
so you'll have a thought like, what is that? And you're like, nope, not going there.
Mm-hmm. In the past, I would get on Google immediately and start searching like, sharp pain in chest,
cancer,
momentary. Yeah. And what's interesting is that on Google, like all of the links that are on the front page are meant, like they're all designed to give you the worst case scenario because that's what everyone's worried about. And so you immediately are going to go click on that link.
Oh, yeah.
So it's a completely terrible, like the whole setup is basically against you when you deal with health anxiety or different types of anxiety.
That's really interesting. Thanks for that. Yeah. How much of this anxiety is caused by the modern world in which we live? Because in some ways we've never had it cushier.
Yeah.
I work for myself. This is happening at home,
I think that's good to think about.
We're not running into battle. We're not dealing with these significant stresses.
I'm not defending my family from a potential attacker.
Yeah, I'm not on the street fending for my family. So part of me feels guilty for feeling anxiety because I think, well, gosh, quite a cushy life. And yet, if you walk around with this stupid thing, which I hate, then people are... I mean, the 2 examples you just gave me began with technology. Like the one was the guy texting you about work and you saw it on your way to work. The second was you typing things into Google.
Yeah.
So have you given that much thought about?
I haven't given that a lot of thought, but I'm totally open to that. I mean, anxiety is definitely increasing nowadays.
And I think it's because we're perpetually in this state of response. This people text each other today as if they're in the same room as each other talking to them. Mm-hmm. And if you and I were in the same room, and I was like, hey, Cameron, and you didn't respond, I'd think either you didn't hear me or you were ignoring me for some reason, in which case I might be offended.
Yeah, right.
People text like that. Hey, Cameron, if you don't text back like soon, they're like,
they make all these assumptions about what's
I don't want to
on.
have to reply to people like texting me throughout the day. I have a wife and kids and a family. I want to lay out the back and smoke a cigar. I want to write and read. I don't have to be on beck and call. But this is what's happened. When I was 16 years old, if you wanted to contact me, you had 3 options and only 3 options. You could write a letter to my house and post it. You could call the phone that was bolted to my kitchen wall. Or you could come to my house. And if I weren't there, go to the shops and find me. I don't think of it. There's no real other way.
So how much is technology increasing our anxiety?
That's my point.
I'm
not saying people weren't anxious back then, but today you can get in touch with me. Now, thank God I don't run my own social media, but people are writing to me over there on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. I let my voicemail fill up so I don't have to reply to people. People text me, dude, just so you know your voicemail's full. I'm like, I know. I don't want to hear from you. I don't want to respond to you. I don't want to be bothered by these million voices demanding my attention. I want to live a more purposeful life. And if that means offending you, I'm really okay with that. Go.
No, I think that technology can definitely be contributing. And there's probably studies that have been done to prove this. It seems like that's a pretty logical thing that it's happened. Yeah. So I would be on board with that. And it's going to make me start to think more about ways to disconnect from technology. My wife and I have already been talking about that. Like, we want to be disconnected from technology when we're with our kids, and
this is
spending good quality time with them instead of always, like you said, always being on beck and call.
Forget about
for everyone who wants to talk to us and text us.
You know what I did recently? I jumped emails. So somehow mattfradd@gmail.com, which is pretty, secretive. I'm not sure how you'd guess that was my email, but that's just sarcasm. That got out online, and people started writing me a lot, bombarding. People I've never heard of are writing to me. I'm like, I don't have time for this. So I created a new email, and then I set a vacation responder indefinitely that says, don't use it anymore. Go to my website. I don't even give them my assistant's email. I just don't want to deal with you. And I jump over here. And I am so proud of myself, and I think I'm making the right decision, and I think people should be more like that. And it's surprising to me that people find that almost a little whoa, that's a bit much. I think you should probably do something like that. Why do I have any right to respond to some random person who writes to me? Even if
you mean obligation.
Obligation, yeah. Thank you. Even if they're in a crisis. I receive so many emails from people who are struggling with pornography that if I were to reply to each of them substantively, I would have no time to do anything else.
Yeah.
Which is why I wrote a book on the topic. And so actually, as I say that, I'm thinking to myself, okay, then I should incorporate that into my reply. If you're looking for help for this. So I will do that, right? To be more responsible. Because I do want to help people. I don't want people to be in pain. And I want to help however I can. I really do. But at the same time, you have to be very vigilant about guarding that, I think.
Speaking of people who are reaching out for help and want stuff, as I've become more vocal about anxiety, I've had people reach out to me and ask me I'm dealing with anxiety in this moment. What can I do? And what I know, one guy actually was telling me that his main source of doubt or his main source of anxiety is thinking about God's existence and objections to God's existence. And he had basically the same exact experience that I did, where it was this panic attack and it would continue. And what I told him was, bro, get away from apologetics right now. Leave it alone. Get on top of your anxiety, and then revisit the arguments when your brain is right and you're in the right mindset, and you're not going to start catastrophizing. Get a hold of your anxiety before you start to really assess the arguments and the evidence, because I think that you're really susceptible right now to irrationality. So that's I think that's going back to what you said earlier, is I'm not trying to say that everyone is irrational.
Sure. But
for people who are struggling with anxiety, I think you need to get on top of that first, because it can be the source. It can be one major source of what's driving you to doubt God's existence. And it doesn't just have to do with God. It can do with,
exactly.
My main source of anxiety is about health
issues, yeah.
So I think you've got to get that on top of that first before you want to start tackling things from the rational.
Something like combat fatigue or argument fatigue. It's you can get to it, we just kind of get burnt out. Mm-hmm. But I also wonder if you can kind of get addicted to it. Now, I might be using that word in a loose sense of the word, but it
can become a kind of idol.
Well, people seem to get addicted. I'm trying to think of an analogy to things like political commentary. CNN, Fox News, they love it. They're always watching it, and they're feeling outraged, and they're catastrophizing what will happen if Trump is reelected, or what will happen if he isn't. And that seems like if you want to help with your anxiety, just don't watch it, because it's not like you watching it is leading you to do something that's going to help fix the country. You're just getting angry. But it's almost like people are getting addicted to people obviously are. Not addicted I might mean that in the loose sense, but it's we become accustomed to it. Like an afternoon coffee that you need to have to get you through. We turn on Ben Shapiro or CNN to get that fix. And that isn't to say they don't have valuable things to say. CNN less so. That isn't to say that, right? But it is to say, I wonder if there's something like that with the obsessing with apologetics or things that lead us to anxiety. Like here's an example. I'm sorry, I feel like I'm talking all over the place here. So this is the cause of my anxiety, or it is one cause of my anxiety, but it's also the solution to it. So it's a loop. So if I'm bored, I pick up my phone. And then I see that I have emails and texts, which cause me anxiety. So it's this like, it causes anxiety, it soothes anxiety. So this is why I'm not, because I'm better than most people, but most people are constantly looking at their phone. It's like this constant loop of anxiety and soothing. What do you think about that?
What's the question?
Well, what do you think about that?
I should have been hitting myself in my legs.
Oh my gosh. I don't know if there's a question except to say, do you agree with that? Because I threw out a bunch there. We tend to...
Because it can be the source of anxiety, but then also the solution.
So political outrage is like that. Like you're like, and you get your hit of outrage. There's a sense in which it's soothing, but it aggravates you. Same thing with the phone. And so what
I've been about is just like find the source of your anxiety and nip that in the bud as like best you can.
But what's so difficult about it is what I'm saying is it's also the source of soothing. Like the man who's going to apologetics and burning out on it is probably going there to regulate a little because he feels God doesn't exist, everything's terrible, so I need to get this sorted. So there's a sense in which he's soothing himself, but he's becoming agitated. So when you say to someone, we'll just nip that out, he's like, you're telling me to take away the thing that's sad, like pacifying me in a way.
Yeah, I guess I would include that in the everything that's leading to anxiety. So if the fact that you think that you have to have this in order to be happy, or in order to reach some state of well-being, I would say that's a form of catastrophizing.
That's good, yeah.
So instead of feeding into that and making things worse, which you think you're doing yourself a good favor or whatever.
Yeah.
Instead of doing that, try something else. Like that's obviously not working for you. Try something else. Put that away for a little while. Get your mind right, and just see how you feel. When you are in your right mind, then pick it back up and just see how things are. But until you get to that point, I think that we ought to stop and really figure out what's really going on. So sometimes I think the right thing to do is to just put your stuff away that's causing you to go down this path. So put your phone down for a while, or you can. There's a lot of stuff that you can do on your phone to limit what you can do on it.
What's interesting,
and we don't take advantage of that. Like you can limit how much time you can spend on your apps. You can limit who can send you messages and notifications. You can turn off all notifications if you want, so you never have to look at any. So there's stuff that you can do in order to still use technology and not be bombarded with it.
You just have to be super vigilant.
Yeah,
you almost have to have the level of self-control that most of us don't have.
But it just depends on how serious you are about getting better. Like that was my thing.
But like my point is, I think for many people, if you're serious about being better, it's going to mean more than adjusting apps. It might mean just getting rid of your phone.
It could be maybe you need to give it to your spouse and say, put this in a closet for me.
There's those little lock boxes. If you've seen them,
you could do something like that and just be like,
fantastic.
Get this away from me.
But what does that say about us that we need to lock things away from ourselves because we don't have the self-control to reach them? Honestly, who cares what it says about you?
Right, exactly.
You're in pain. You need to just do it. Start there.
Yeah, like what yeah. That strikes me as another insecurity. It's like, who cares?
Yeah. It's awesome, dude. Well, thanks very much. Tell people how they can learn more about capturing Christianity, about your fantastic debates. I mean, hopefully we'll have a lot of our evangelical brothers and sisters watching, but we'll also have a lot of Catholics who may not have heard about you before. So tell them maybe if there was one debate you would tell them to go turn to on your YouTube channel to watch, to learn about you and your ministry. What would it be? Before I talk about my ministry, let me just mention that there's a really great book on anxiety by J.P. Moreland called Finding Peace. Really? J.P. Moreland wrote a book on that? J.P. Moreland is like the anxiety captain. He's dealt with that's a terrible name. I love it. He's dealt with anxiety his whole life. He was prone to it. He had some of the same experiences that I did. So he has a book on it, and he does talks on it too. What's it cool? So yeah, Finding Peace. See, I'm turning to my soother. By J.P. Moreland. There you go. J.P. Moreland, great book. He gives a lot of strategies that he's used as well in the book, and a lot of them did help me when I was first going through anxiety. And I'm doing a lot better now, and I'm off medication, so it's doing great. But if you guys want a resource on that, check out Finding Peace by J.P. Moreland. Such a great book. But to talk a little about my ministry, capturingchristianity.com is my website. But the main source of my ministry, what I do, is on YouTube. So I do a few different types of content. I'm actually like
variety channel, I think is the term for it. So I don't create just one type of content, which on YouTube is actually kind of bad. Like you only want to do one type of content per channel. But some channels do variety and it's okay and it works for them. So sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. Anyways, I'm a variety channel. So what I do is I have videos that I post of just me talking about a subject for maybe 5 minutes, maybe 30 minutes. I'll respond to atheist objections or I'll respond to an atheist. I have a bunch of videos like that. The second type of content that I do are interviews. So I interview professional Christian philosophers. They don't have to be Protestant. They can be Catholic. I've interviewed some really brilliant Catholics. And that's the second type of content. The third type of content is I host discussions between people. And so one of the ones that I did most recently was between Ed Fazer and Graham Oppy on whether there are any good arguments for God's existence. And so that's what I do.
What was the outcome of that? Did Oppy say no?
So Oppy is...
I don't know what good means. Not necessarily successful, but...
The first hour and 20 minutes of that discussion, like if you're not interested in really analytic philosophy, really breaking stuff down, because what he does, Graham, is in the first part of the discussion, he breaks down what it means, what is the criteria of a good argument. Mm-hmm. And for a lot of people, it's going to be super boring. Yeah. So if you want to get past that, if you're not super interested,
one of your top comments on that video is this is what you came for.
I pinned it. Yeah, I pinned it because that's what.
Good of you. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it gives you the link to the direct time of when they start going back and forth on some of Fazer's arguments, because they've had back and forth in the literature. Like Graham responded to Ed's book, I think maybe a couple different papers. And so they had a back and forth about some of the points that Graham raised in his papers. And so it was a great discussion. I mean, I enjoyed the whole thing, but if you want to get into the argument side of it, like the actual arguments,
comment.
Yeah, then look at the pinned comment and the first comment in the description, below the description of the video. So that's what I do on my channel. Is I do those two kind of things. So I have some videos where I'm in person, but the majority of my interviews are like Skype interviews where I have somebody and they're live streamed. So I love doing it.
Oh man, you do such a great job. It feels like the Lord has really prepared you for this in giving you your talents and studies to be a great photographer. And I've said it before, and I'm not just saying it to flatter you. I can't think of another, this might just be because I don't use YouTube as much as other people, but when I look at your stuff, I'm like, this is better than anything I've ever seen, whether it be secular or Christian.
Well, there are, I'm not trying to toot my own horn here, but I think that what sets my ministry apart is that my background is in photography. And so I try to make things look really nice and really pretty and use 4K stuff to make it extra, high resolution and everything. So that's just part of who I am and my story. But I don't recommend that for everybody. Like if people that are watching YouTube are usually really, what's the term?
Forgiving.
They don't really care about quality necessarily, as long as they can hear it, as long as they can sort of see what's happening, and it's not like it's not tedious to try to figure out what this person is saying because the microphone quality is so awful. As long as they can see it and hear it okay.
Thomistic Institute.
As long as they can see it okay.
There's a podcast called the Thomistic Institute. It has fantastic content, which you should check out.
I think I have it.
It's really good. It's a
podcast, right?
Yeah, these Dominicans, they facilitate it, but they basically record these lectures on campus.
I'm gonna look it up. I think I have it.
It's fantastic content. I think they're right now in the process of boosting their audio content.
Really?
Yeah. Fazer's given a bunch of lectures there.
The Thomistic Institute. There it is.
There you go. Oh, have you subscribed? Good.
Yeah, I told you.
Yeah. Well, there's another one called Godsplaining, where two Dominicans sit around and chat.
Oh, interesting.
Good. Yeah. Father Gregory Pine's on my show. He's part of it.
Oh, okay.
Continue.
What was I saying? Oh, for everybody. It's not for everybody.
Yeah.
It's not for everybody.
And you would say, right, like if someone feels like they've got to meet your quality, it's dude, you might just spend all your time trying to do that, and you're not actually using the gifts that you have, and you'll end up going nowhere.
If it's not going to assist you in getting, more views, or if it doesn't make sense with your branding, there's no need for it. Like if you look at the top guys, like even like PewDiePie, PewDiePie is like the biggest YouTuber ever. I think someone's actually going to pass him up pretty soon here, but he has like the biggest YouTube channel, and the quality of his videos it's not that great.
Yeah. And the content
doesn't matter.
Also not that great.
The content, people love the content.
Why?
But
I'm embarrassed to call myself human.
I'm just talking about the quality of videos right now.
We're not going to trash on PewDiePie.
Lighting and camera angles and stuff.
Yeah.
Like the setup that you have here is perfect. Like it's exact. Like it's actually way more than what people sort of need in order to
Yeah.
consume content on YouTube.
Thanks, man.
So it's
That makes me feel good.
no, it's great. And yeah, so that's what I would say is that's one thing that I embrace, the quality aspect of it. That's something that I embraced as part of who I am.
Mm-hmm. You
Trying
had
to
all
be
that
authentic.
background coming in.
Right.
And it's not totally tedious to you to set up this camera
no,
and
yeah,
do
it's
all
not
this.
te-
That's
yeah.
just second nature.
Yeah.
Whereas for,
yeah, and I
for
like
me,
doing
I,
it. Like,
I wouldn't even know how to turn one of those cameras on, I don't think.
like I enjoy doing that kind of stuff, thinking about lighting and different camera angles and cool stuff that I can do. Like eventually I want to have a studio like this, how you have your in-person interviews. Like I want to do that.
Good, man. Good. Yeah, because it would be sad if the only YouTube channels that were exploding were like atheistic propaganda channels.
And there's a lot of those.
And we should say thank you to my patrons, and you would say thank you to yours, because, you know, it's funny. I mean, some of these atheist channels, you go to their Patreon page, they have a lot of patrons. And you're like, it would be sad if we as Christians weren't investing in things that we consider to be good content that could, you know, spread the word.
Right. And they were, and we're not.
Yeah, that would be sad.
Yeah, it would be.
But it's been beautiful. It's been beautiful to see that there are a lot of people who are stepping up and making sure these independent forms of media are growing.
Right. Yeah. I mean, on your Patreon, it's really, really healthy. And I think we need more ministries like this that are doing this on YouTube and being very strategic about it. Don't just like pump out videos just because you want to have this thing.
Yeah.
It's really about bringing people to a saving knowledge of God. That's really what it's about, and representing it in the right way. And there's a lot that's you've got to think about in order to do that. It's like it should not be taken lightly. I think about the connection that Dr. Craig, going back to him, who you interviewed just a couple weeks ago, about a month ago at this point.
Yeah.
He talks about the fact that not everyone should be a debater. Like you shouldn't just go
Most
into
people shouldn't, he would
most
say.
people shouldn't be debating atheists. And the reason for that is because that's not what everyone is called to do.
And that would apply to me. Like, I think I've done a debate on pornography on Unbelievable. Did you know that? With Justin
No.
Farley? I debated like a sex worker and someone else and a libertarian who thought porn was good. You should go listen to it.
Oh my goodness.
It was fun. I did really well.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I destroyed them. But I could not do a debate with an atheist. I'm just not quick on my feet when it comes to these sorts of things. Like, and I don't want to pretend to be. It's like, that's just not my gift.
Yeah, so if you're looking for advice on starting a YouTube channel, don't do it. No, really think about it, really pray about it. It's not something that you should take lightly. Basically, is my whole point.
Do you like that? I destroyed them. Isn't that how you said I got
That
to
is
start
very
speaking?
controversial.
You got to do that. Matt destroys pornographers.
You should put that
No,
on your YouTube
I don't
channel.
want to. I did really well. It was hopeless. They were absolutely hopeless. So it wasn't so much my genius. It was more understanding the science about what's coming out and them having no clue about it, I think.
Wow.
Yeah, but that was fun. So
I'm
there
gonna
you
have to go
and it was
listen to
actually
it.
Frank Turek who actually heard it, and I saw that he posted about it. Said this is a great episode, and then it was Sean McDowell who heard it and got in touch with me to be interviewed on his podcast because of that unbelievable clip. There you go.
Wow.
But for some reason, I feel competent to talk on that issue. Maybe because I wrote a book on it, whereas I haven't really written much on atheism. A little bit here and there, but yeah, cool. But yeah, knowing your gifts and praying and asking the Lord to direct you, because we can fall into the trap of thinking unless I'm on YouTube, I'm not doing anything good. Unless I've got a significant following, I'm not doing anything good. It's like, no, like if you're like a stay-at-home mom or a stay-at-home dad, like you're potentially doing far more for the kingdom. In fact, you are doing far more for the kingdom if that's what the Lord's calling you than if you were to go get 100,000 subscribers.
Yeah. And that's not what you're supposed to be doing.
And that's a tough thing. Like speaking of biases, right? Is biases the plural of bias?
Biases?
I'm not sure. But speaking of bias, not being able to see that part in us, like it's being aware of that. Like in ministry, it's like my wife and my kids have to come first. If I save the world or if I bring people to Christ, you know, through these endeavors, and I fail to love my wife, like I think I risk going to hell. Like if I abandon the family.
Well, something you pointed out was like, the reason I think why we don't really take that part as seriously is because like no one stands up and applauds us after we like change a diaper.
Yeah. And it's an honest thing. It's like, I'm embarrassed to admit it because it's so honest, but I admit it because I know it's a lot of people's experience. When I go out on the road and I give a talk, like I'm going to Missouri and I'm going to give a talk to these high school students, they're old boys school. It'll do terrific. I will crush them. It'll be awesome. And they'll probably love it. And I feel really good about that. I just spoke to like 1,000 young men about breaking free from pornography. I feel good. But if I come home and the house is messy and my kid is being moody, and then I snap at them and I didn't intend to, and then I feel like a failure and I feel like agitated, what am I going to want to go towards? Not the messy, moody, agitated house. I want to be out there. And
where everybody loves you and is applauding you and
realize
affirming
that.
you.
We don't see that.
Yep.
We justify it. Like, no, I'm doing the work of the Lord. No, you're not. No, you got to love your wife and love your kids, and if they don't come first, which is really great why I have a very strong wife, because she'll tell me.
Mine
she'll
too.
Put me in my place.
Mine too. She's
really cool.
She's done it several times already.
That's cool because your parents were in ministry. Oh no, her parents were in ministry. I beg your pardon. So she's probably seen how that plays out. What's good, what might not be so good, and so she might be able to see that in you and be like, nope.
Yeah, right. So she's noticed at times when in the evenings I'll still be like posting stuff on social media or interacting with people, and it's like my kid is sitting here right next to me and I'm sitting here just on my phone, not paying attention to them. And she'll point that out, regularly. It's something I've definitely not mastered.
Yeah.
And I often feel guilty about.
Well,
but I'm really thankful to have a wife that's constantly trying to make me better. That's one of the things that I love about her.
Yeah.
She's always making me better.
That's awesome. Yeah, and then once you get an office outside the home, if you do.
I think eventually it will happen.
If you do that, because I do that, it's really great. Because I'll go to the office, and it's a cheap little office for me, but I'll just lock the door, leave my phone, I'll just text Cammy, driving home, don't have my phone. I'll leave my phone, leave my computer, and just drive home for the weekend, and it's great. That's what I have to do. I understand not everyone's like that. People get better at regulating their behaviors on technology. For me, even if I put it up, it's still this like, I could get it, I shouldn't.
Yeah.
And so I'm still doing that hard work of resisting when if it's not an option, I'm just a lot freer.
Right.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
What is your favorite argument for God's existence?
I'm starting to think yours. I like that
really?
a lot. I thought that was really fascinating. Again, I have to think about it more. I like Aquinas' fifth way. The idea is that when we look at the world, we see that things act towards ends, and it's not by chance because it doesn't happen haphazardly. It happens with regularity. And
things as in what, like people or everything?
Natural things. Like you could say, like this seed turns into this flower.
I'm stuck here.
Oh,
there we go.
Electrons and protons join together to form atoms, and things like that. And this happens regularly. And you could say, well, it's either by chance or by some sort of baked in intention. And if it's not chance,
it sounds like a design argument.
Yeah, it is a design argument, but it's not. It doesn't. It can't be thwarted by any appeal to evolution or something because, like the design argument, it's before that. But it's not necessarily based on the first constants and quantities or whatever Craig talks about. It's just saying you look around, you see that things act towards an end that's good. And you're like, what explains that? Why does things happen with regularity? If it's not chance, it has to be something else. And if there's some sort of baked in intention, well, it would seem that intention has to be given.
Here's something that you might find super interesting in his book, How Reason Can Lead to God. Josh was. I
gotta get this book.
He was a computer scientist, analyst, something to do with computers. So he was building models, and I think he got a grant one time. And I could be getting the details could be fuzzy here. But he was working on this project where he was trying to create complex creatures through a process like evolution on a computer program.
Wow, he must be a brilliant dude.
He's pretty smart. Anyways, he started to put in the parameters and like let's start out with these number of complex creatures and then let's just see what happens. Like let's just say that they mutate and then like let's throw in natural selection and then just see what happens in however many generations and just see what kind of creatures we wind up with. And every time he ran it, if it was just randomized, like there was no end goal that he specified in the system, then it would always go to more simple organisms. Or on the other hand, if he specified like really long creatures, like he wanted every creature to be really just the longest possible, then the creatures would end up doing that. Like they would mutate and natural selection would go toward that direction. But if he didn't specify anything, then they would just go and basically evolve down to their simplest parts. And so the only way to get complexity in this program was to have that as the end goal.
Interesting.
Was to put that in there. So this reminds me of this argument.
Yeah, so that. But then if you were to...
So even on something like evolution, seems like you might need an end goal, and that would be
Interesting.
completely compatible
Yeah.
with like these naturalistic mechanisms, but you have this end
Right,
goal
even the
set
word-
from the beginning.
Even the word evolution assumes that we're evolving instead of devolving. Whereas these creatures Josh created, when they would go to their simplest parts or something, we would say they were devolving. They weren't actually becoming more, they weren't incorporating more being. They were being reduced.
Yeah, they were becoming less and less complex.
Yeah, and then I would say, I don't know, I would just say it seems like God exists. My life works a lot better when I act like God exists. Like fundamentally better, not just, it's not like a superficial better, but like everything just seems to be like infused better. And so I go with that. I also had an experience of God's love when I was 17, and that was transformative in my own life. And it wasn't a sort of experience that just faded like every other experience I had as a teen. And so I'd say like these are kind of reasons I believe in God. I would also say I'm with Craig and others who say when I look at the arguments for God and against God, I find these more compelling. But I don't walk around holding arguments in my head and therefore siding with that continually. I just
Yeah, for me, I think apologetics has played a real central role in making it the case that I'm still a Christian. So I started out as a Christian, but the reason why I'm still a Christian after I was introduced to philosophy and apologetics is because of apologetics and the arguments and the evidence. So I think that's, a lot of people will say, oh, well, you're just a Christian because you grew up that way. Well, I'll say in part, but the reason why I'm still a Christian is because of the arguments and the evidence, ultimately. Like there were plenty of opportunities for me to fall away if I thought that there were good reasons and good arguments on the other side of it.
All right, so thank you very much, Cameron. We are going to take a pause here on YouTube. If you want to watch the post-show wrap-up clip, become a patron at patreon.com/Matt Fradd. In this post-show wrap-up clip, I'm going to share with Cameron one good reason I think he should be a Catholic. Now, he'll likely disagree with it, but if you're a patron, you'll get to watch that by going to patreon.com/Matt Fradd.